I didn't mean to open the sewing box. I was only supposed to pack it, wrap it in brown paper, and label it with the black marker that was already bleeding through my fingers. But the lid had always been loose, the varnish flaking like old snow, and when I lifted it this time a small, folded envelope slid from the false bottom and touched my wrist like a cold breath. For a second I thought it was a trick of grief, the way the mind invents a hand to hold when there's none. The envelope had no stamp, no address. Only my mother's handwriting, for when the house is quiet. The house had never been quieter. The refrigerator hummed in a different key since she died, as if the appliance had learned to mourn. Even the floorboards, always dramatic, kept their voices low. I stood in the kitchen, with sunlight thinning against the curtains, and ran my thumb along the flap like I was smoothing a child's hair. I told myself I should wait. Call my brother. Ask Aunt Ruth to come over with her casserole voice and church perfume. But the letters of my name, half finished, as if she started to write it and then changed her mind, weighted the paper. The envelope smelled faintly of lavender and starch, the scent of the woman who hemmed her truths so neatly the seams never showed. I slid a butter knife under the flap. A single sheet. My mother's careful script. No greeting, no date. Just the first sentence, a stone dropped into a dark lake. Before you were born, I had another child. I forgot how to breathe. The room tilted, and the hum of the refrigerator climbed. In the sink, a spoon trembled against porcelain, a tiny bell for a private ceremony. I read the line again, slower, as if words could be unmade by gentleness. She wrote about winter, about a job she was about to lose and a debt she couldn't repay, about a love that had already started to taste like medicine, necessary, bitter, and given in teaspoons. She wrote that no one knew, not even my father, especially not my father. I looked up and saw the kitchen for the first time without her in it. The dent in the table where she flattened dough, the jar of pennies she never spent because pennies make wishes heavier. The clock above the doorway, stuck at 11:41 since the day the battery died during a thunderstorm. I wondered what else in this house had stopped at the exact minute it couldn't carry on. There was more. She wrote about a clinic in a town I'd only visited on school trips, a hallway that smelled like bleach and boiled linen, a nurse with gentle hands who never met anyone's eyes. She wrote about a midwife who spoke in sentences that folded in the middle, like towels, and about a window that looked out at a church where weddings and funerals both spilled onto the same steps. It happened quickly, she said. It had to. I sat. The chair complained in the language of old wood. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice, and then remembered it was afternoon. I traced a line in the grain of the table, like a map I wished I could read. My mother wrote that she chose a name and then swallowed it. That she wrapped the baby in a blanket she'd knitted from leftover yarn, not the color she wanted, but the color she had. That the baby's eyes were dark and still, as if already listening. The letter did not apologize. That hurt more than it should have. It didn't ask me to forgive her. It didn't even ask me to understand. It asked me to know. The difference landed in my chest like a soft stone I would carry for a very long time. At the bottom, in smaller script, she wrote, "If you read this, then I didn't find the courage to speak. I pray you find the courage to look." I folded the paper along its old crease and slipped it back into its envelope, as if a secret could be returned to the dark once it had tasted the air. But the room would not be the same. The light had shifted. The clock, though broken, seemed to listen. Somewhere a train took a breath and announced itself, and the sound ran through the house like a thread pulled through fabric, tightening everything it touched. I opened the freezer, not because I was hungry, but because grief teaches you to check the places where nothing grows. Ice gathered around the edges, like winter rehearsing. I closed it and leaned my forehead against the cool door. Another child, I said to the metal, to the empty room, to the lavender that lingered. The words were clumsy in my mouth, like a language I wasn't raised to speak. When I turned back to the table, the envelope had slid a little, the way paper does when a draft sneaks in, or when a house shifts to accommodate the truth it has been denying. I pressed my palm on top of it. Under my hand, the sheet felt warmer than it should have. I thought of the box's false bottom, Of all the ways my mother had taught me to hide a seam. The phone rang, and I didn't answer. It would be Aunt Ruth, or the funeral home, or the florist asking about vases. I watched it ring until it stopped. In the quiet that followed, the house exhaled. I could hear the undertones, the pipes remembering rain, the rafters ticking, the past taking its seat at the table as if it had always had a place set. I went to my mother's bedroom and stood in the doorway. The bed was made too tightly, a habit of a woman who feared what might crawl in while she slept. On the dresser, a wooden rosary, a dish of earrings that had lost their partners, a photograph of me and my brother with our faces turned toward the same sun. I placed the envelope beside the photograph, and in the mirror I saw my own eyes, darker than I believed, watching me the way the letter claimed another pair once had. I whispered, "Where are you?" The question was to the air, to the winter, to the nurse with gentle hands, to a child I'd never met who might be older than me or younger by a sliver of years that changed everything. The house, polite as always, did not answer. But I felt something shift, like a drawer giving up its resistance, somewhere behind the wall. I folded the letter again, not to hide it, but to hold it. And for the first time since my mother died, I knew exactly what the next hour of my life would be for. I would start with the town she mentioned without naming. I would start with the church steps where both joy and grief share the same stone. I would start with the seam. The next morning the light felt wrong. It was too white, too clean, as if the sun had come to inspect the house for evidence. I moved slowly through the hallway, past the family photos that suddenly looked staged, smiles rehearsed for a camera that didn't know the truth yet. The air tasted of dust and lemon polish. Every step raised tiny ghosts that hovered just long enough to watch me pass. I carried the letter in my pocket like contraband, its corners bruising the fabric. In her closet, my mother's dresses hung in rigid formation. Blues, grays, the occasional floral print she wore only on church Sundays. I pulled one sleeve forward and felt how the fabric had forgotten warmth. Behind the row of clothes, the wallpaper peeled slightly, revealing a faint outline of something rectangular, a small panel I'd never noticed before. My pulse quickened. It wasn't the first time she'd built walls within walls. I fetched a chair and climbed. The panel gave way with a dry sigh. Inside was a narrow cavity lined with newspaper from the year I was born. Folded between the yellowed pages lay an old photograph, my mother, younger, standing beside a man I didn't recognize, his arm half around her, their faces turned away from the camera as if privacy were a pose. Behind them, a hospital entrance sign read St. Vincent's Clinic. My stomach tightened. That was the town from the letter. I sat on the closet floor, photograph trembling between my fingers. The man's hand rested on her shoulder in a way that wasn't brotherly, wasn't polite. There was tenderness there, dangerous tenderness. I thought of my father's temper, the way silence followed him like weather. If he had known, would this house even exist? I slid the photo into the envelope with the letter, feeling them merge into a single pulse. The closet smelled of mothballs and something sweeter, rose soap, maybe. I pushed aside a box of scarves and found a small wooden drawer built into the lower wall, locked with a rusted keyhole. Typical of her to hide sentiment inside structure. I tried the keys from her nightstand. None fit. I considered forcing it, but the sound of splintering wood in this house felt sacrilegious. So I simply sat, tracing the edge, whispering, "What are you guarding, Mother?" A draft moved through the room, though no window was open. One of the dresses, cream lace, the one she wore to my graduation, shifted slightly, brushing my arm. The touch startled me more than it should have. I remembered her words from the letter. If you read this, then I didn't find the courage to speak. Maybe courage had simply changed form, hiding itself in keys, panels, drawers. I went to the kitchen for coffee, but forgot to drink it. The clock still stuck at 11:41 stared back like a witness refusing testimony. I scribbled a note to myself. Find St. Vincent's records. Next to it, another line. Ask Aunt Ruth about the winter of '79. She'd been my mother's shadow back then. She would know where skeletons slept. When I called, Ruth's voice carried the tremor of someone who had expected this day. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked before I could speak. I lied out of habit. "Just cleaning." Silence expanded like fog. Then she said, "If you go digging, child, be ready for the smell." The line went dead. I realized my hands were shaking not from fear, but from inheritance. Secrets run in the blood, like iron. Back in the bedroom, I stared at the locked drawer. The metal around the keyhole was worn smooth, as if fingers had visited it nightly. I knelt, pressed my ear close, and heard nothing, then something faint, a shift inside, like paper breathing. I whispered again, "Show me." The house answered with a single creak from the hallway. Maybe that was permission. I fetched a screwdriver. The wood resisted, proud even in decay, until the screw's final twist released a sigh of resignation. Inside lay a stack of envelopes bound by ribbon faded to the color of dried wine. The top one bore no name, only a date, December 3rd, 1979. My birth year. I opened it with the same trembling obedience I'd had with the first letter. The handwriting wasn't my mother's. It was harsher, slanted, impatient. "You cannot keep him. They will never understand." Beneath, a single initial, M. I read it twice, then glanced back at the photograph. The unknown man's mouth was half open, as if about to pronounce that very letter. M. Michael? Mark? Maybe the father of the child she'd lost, or given away. My heartbeat drummed a code the walls could probably translate. There were more letters, but I couldn't bring myself to open them yet. The smell of old paper filled the air like incense at confession. I wrapped the ribbon again, placed the bundle on the bedspread, and watched a sunbeam inch across it. Secrets look harmless in daylight. That's how they survive. I carried the packet to the living room, where her sewing machine waited like an idol of patience. Each spool of thread a different color of restraint. I placed the envelopes beneath it, fitting them where her feet once pressed the pedal, and whispered, "You stitched lies tighter than hems." The machine's metal shimmered. For a heartbeat, I thought it hummed back. Night fell without warning. Houses grieving their owners don't obey clocks. I lit one candle, then another. Shadows grew long and articulate, pointing toward the hallway, the closet, the hidden space. I followed them until I stood before the empty frame of the wall panel. My reflection in the window overlapped hers in the photograph pinned above the dresser. We were the same height, the same outline. I took the ribbon letters again. One envelope slipped free, revealing a corner of hospital stationery. The name St. Vincent's Clinic printed in blue, and below, a faint signature, Sister Agnes. That was a lead, a doorway. I whispered the name aloud, testing how it felt on my tongue. It tasted like antiseptic and prayer. In bed that night, sleep refused me. The house spoke in its private dialect of clicks and sighs. I thought of the missing child, somewhere out there, alive, perhaps, walking under a sky my mother never saw. Did he or she know? Did they carry the same restless pulse? I reached for the envelope again, as if the paper itself could answer. Outside, the train passed, its whistle cutting through distance and denial alike. I imagined it heading toward that forgotten town, carrying my next decision. By morning I would pack a bag. The letter had asked me to find courage. I finally understood its shape. It looked like movement. When dawn arrived, I stood before the mirror, hair uncombed, eyes shadowed. A resemblance I couldn't escape. "I'm going," I said to her reflection and mine. The silence that followed wasn't disapproval. It was relief. The bus to St. Vincent's smelled of diesel and old decisions. I sat near the window, the letter clutched in my hand, afraid it might dissolve if I let go. Outside, fields blurred into the color of forgotten photographs. My reflection in the glass looked older, as if I'd aged with every secret I unfolded. I tried to picture my mother here, decades earlier, carrying her silence like a child she could never hold. The road wound through towns that hadn't changed since the 70s. Gas stations with peeling signs, diners with curtains yellowed from cigarettes, churches with bells that rang out of habit. Each one could have been part of her story. I kept searching for clues in strangers' faces, any trace of her eyes, her hands, her unspoken apologies. The letter in my pocket burned like confession. When the bus stopped near the old hospital grounds, my stomach clenched. The building was still there, though half of it had been swallowed by vines and time. St. Vincent's Clinic, the faded sign read, its paint cracked like dry skin. I walked the gravel path slowly, as if stepping on her memories could wake something I wasn't ready to meet. The air smelled of rust and rain-soaked paper. Inside, dust floated like prayer ash. A single fluorescent light buzzed weakly above a cracked reception desk. An old man in a janitor's uniform looked up, surprised to see someone young enough to still believe in answers. "Records office?" I asked. He nodded, pointed down a corridor that seemed longer than it should have been. "Good luck, miss," he muttered. "That place keeps more ghosts than files." The records office door groaned when I pushed it. Behind a glass counter sat a woman in her 60s, hair in a tight bun, name tag reading Agnes. My heart stuttered. "Sister Agnes?" I asked. Her eyes narrowed, studying me as if tracing bloodlines. "Who's asking?" she said. I slid the envelope across the counter. "My mother was here, winter of '79. She didn't touch the letter, just looked at it, then at me. "So she finally told someone," she whispered, and for a moment, the years peeled away from her face. "We swore to forget that winter." Her fingers trembled slightly as she unlocked a drawer beneath the counter. Out came a folder, thin but heavy with consequence. "Your mother wasn't the only one hiding." My throat tightened. "There was a child," I said. Agnes nodded. "A girl. Born alive. Sent away 2 days later. The adoption was arranged privately, quietly." Her voice softened. "Your mother begged for one thing, that the child never be told who she was. Said it was Mercy." I wanted to speak, to demand why Mercy looked so much like abandonment, but words turned to dust on my tongue. Agnes placed a yellowed paper before me. Birth certificate. The ink almost faded. Name, Grace. My knees weakened. "Do you know where she is?" I asked. "No," Agnes said. "But I can tell you where she went." She scribbled an address on a scrap of paper. Sycamore Street, North Hollow. I folded it as if it were a living thing. The name pulsed like a heartbeat in my hand. "Your mother came back once," Agnes added quietly. "Years later. She stood outside the chapel, never came in. I watched her through the window. She looked lighter, like she'd forgiven herself for something I didn't understand. Tears blurred my vision. Maybe forgiveness was just another word for distance. I left the hospital with the folder pressed against my chest. The sky had turned the color of pewter. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, too lazy to strike. I walked until I reached the bus stop, but I couldn't make myself sit. Every sound, the wind, the hum of power lines, seemed to whisper that name. Grace. Back at home, I spread the documents across the table. The house felt smaller now, the walls closer, as if listening. My mother's handwriting stared back at me from the letter. I imagined her reading it aloud, her lips trembling, her eyes somewhere else. All those years, every lullaby, every word of advice, how many had been meant for someone else? I found myself in her bedroom again. The mirror reflected 2 generations of silence. "You had another daughter," I said to her absence. "And you never said her name." The words felt like betrayal, but also like resurrection. The air in the room thickened, and for a heartbeat, I thought I smelled her perfume again, lavender and regret. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Agnes's voice. She looked lighter. How could guilt make anyone lighter? Unless she had known I would come, that the truth would someday unburden her through me. Maybe that was the real inheritance, the duty to finish her unfinished confession. I wrote the address on a clean page and stared at it until the ink bled slightly. Sycamore Street, North Hollow. I searched it online, found an old map, and saw the faint outline of a small house near the edge of town. My pulse quickened. The same rhythm from the letter, the same call that had followed me since I opened that box. I packed a small bag. Just essentials and the envelope. The morning light crept through the curtains like hesitation. I touched the letter once more and whispered, "I'm going where you couldn't." For the first time, the house didn't protest. It let me go quietly. As the bus pulled away, the reflection in the window wasn't just mine anymore. I could almost see another face overlapping mine. Darker eyes, familiar outline. Grace. The thought made my chest ache, and my hands steady all at once. Somewhere out there, she was living a life built on a silence I was finally breaking. And for the first time since I found the letter, I didn't feel haunted. I felt chosen. Not for pain, but for truth. By the time I reached Aunt Ruth's house, the sun had slipped behind a curtain of gray. Her front porch light flickered, more out of stubbornness than purpose. I'd always thought of Ruth as part of the furniture of our family, sturdy, polished, unchanging. But that night, as she opened the door, she looked smaller, as if the years had started carving her down to bone and memory. "You shouldn't have come," she said before I even stepped inside. Her living room smelled of cinnamon and secrets. Every wall was lined with photographs, yet none seemed to include my mother beyond her youth. I sat on the couch where I'd once watched cartoons as a child, and now I could see faint water stains on the ceiling shaped like continents that had drifted too far apart. "I went to St. Vincent's," I began. Her eyes shut briefly, like someone bracing for thunder. "Of course you did," she murmured. That house was never going to keep its silence forever. Ruth poured tea, but didn't drink it. Her hands shook just enough to clink the spoon against porcelain. "She made me promise," she said softly. "Made me swear on our mother's grave." The word promise sliced the air between us. "Why?" I asked. "Because truth ruins the living," she replied, voice flat, eyes distant. "And your mother had already ruined herself once." The steam from the tea rose between us like a veil. "She had another child," I said, watching her flinch. "A girl. Grace." Ruth's lips tightened. "You should know that name," she whispered. "It wasn't meant for you." I leaned forward. "It was meant for me." I found her letter. She wanted me to look. Ruth laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That's what guilt does. It makes cowards call curiosity courage." Her gaze shifted to the window, as if expecting my mother to appear in the reflection. I pressed on. "Did you meet her? The baby?" Ruth hesitated. Her fingers toyed with her wedding ring, though she'd been widowed for years. "Once," she confessed. "Briefly. Your mother was ill afterward. She couldn't eat for days. Said the child had her eyes." My heart clenched. "Then why didn't she bring her home?" Ruth's answer came like a confession dragged from the dark. "Because your father would have left her. He almost did anyway." The room grew colder, as if the house disapproved of such honesty. I stared at the photograph above the fireplace, my mother, young and radiant, holding me as a baby. But now I saw the exhaustion in her smile, the shadow behind her eyes. "She used to hum when she was nervous," I said quietly. "A tune without words." Ruth nodded. "She hummed that same tune the night she went into labor with Grace. Said it calmed the storm." I tried to imagine them both in that house, my mother crying softly, Ruth trying to be brave for the both of them. "Did he know?" I asked. "Your father?" Ruth's lips parted, but no words came. Finally, she said, "He suspected. He wasn't a fool. But he chose ignorance. It was easier than shame." I swallowed hard. "And you?" She looked at me then, eyes sharp as glass. I chose silence. Same as her. The wind rattled the window panes. Somewhere in the distance, a train moaned, echoing the one from the night before. "I found letters," I told her, "from someone named M." Her face went pale. "Then stop reading," she said quickly. "That man brought nothing but ruin." I leaned forward. "Who was he?" Her answer was almost a whisper. "Your father's brother." The room spun. "My uncle?" I breathed. "Not by blood," she said, almost pleading. "He was adopted by your grandparents. They were raised together, but it wasn't the same." My stomach twisted. The letter's words replayed in my mind. "You cannot keep him. They will never understand." Ruth's eyes glistened. She tried to run away with him once, before your father proposed. But their mother fell ill, and she stayed. He left town, came back just long enough to ruin her one last time. I couldn't tell if she was confessing or begging me to stop listening. And the child? I whispered. His, Ruth said simply. Yours to find. For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking unevenly. You could have told me, I said. You were supposed to protect me. Ruth sighed. I did. From the truth. You think knowledge saves you, but it only trades one pain for another. Her tea had gone cold, untouched. Your mother asked me to destroy the letters. I couldn't. Maybe part of me wanted someone to find them one day. Maybe that someone was you. Tears burned the back of my eyes. You both built this web, I said, and left me to walk through it. She looked away. We were women in a time that didn't forgive women. Secrets were our only freedom. Her voice broke on the word freedom. I realized she had been as trapped as my mother, just in different walls. I wanted to hate her. Instead, I just felt tired. As I stood to leave, Ruth grabbed my wrist. If you find Grace, she said urgently, don't tell her everything. Some truths don't heal, they infect. Her grip was surprisingly strong. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I agreed. Outside, rain had started to fall, thin and deliberate. The kind that erases footprints, but not directions. I walked toward the bus stop under the dull orange glow of the streetlights. The world felt quieter now, as if the storm of words had cleared just enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. Ruth's warning echoed in my mind, but so did my mother's last line. Find the courage to look. Between silence and courage, I chose movement once again. When I got home, the house greeted me with its usual sighs. I set the photograph of my mother and the mysterious man on the table. Their eyes, though turned away, seemed to follow each other across decades. I whispered, You weren't evil. You were scared. Saying it out loud made it real. And somehow, forgiving her was easier than forgiving the silence she left behind. That night, I placed the photograph and the letters in my bag. I didn't know exactly where Sycamore Street would lead me, but I knew what I had to do. The past had been buried long enough. Morning would come, and with it, the next step toward the sister I never knew. And maybe the woman my mother once was. The photograph lay on the table like a small, dangerous animal, still, but ready to bite. I slipped it from the envelope and finally noticed what my panic had missed before. The right edge wasn't clean. It had been torn, not cut, fibers frayed like a nerve. Someone had removed a piece on purpose, as if the missing corner could incriminate a name. Or save one. I held it to the window. Afternoon light climbed through the paper, revealing details the naked eye had ignored. A faint stamp bled through from the back, Harper and Sons Photo Lab, and below that, a date smudged into winter. DC79. My birth winter. At the bottom margin, almost invisible, a hand had written 2 letters in pencil, then pressed too hard and erased them. GR, the rest was a ghost. On the dresser, my mother used to keep a blue tin where she hid sewing needles and other small pains. I opened it and found what I didn't know I was looking for, a second photograph, the size of a postcard, folded once, then again, then once more until the creases made it obedient. When I unfolded it, my breath stuttered. It was the same hospital entrance. Same day. Different angle. And its left edge was torn. I set both photos side by side. Their wounds met like broken bones seeking a joint. Slowly, carefully, I aligned the ragged edges. The paper teeth fit. The two halves formed a wider frame. My mother on the left, the man I didn't fully know on the right, and now, revealed between them, a third figure the first photo had cropped out, a nun holding a clipboard, face turned toward my mother, mouth mid-syllable. Sister Agnes before she became a file. My hands trembled. On the reunited bottom margin, more pencil. Front. Do not show. The imperative landed heavy. Who were these meant for if not to be shown? I flipped the larger photo and found a note in my mother's script. For the day I remember and for the day I forget. It was like her to prepare for opposing weather. There was also a car in the background I hadn't noticed, a pale sedan with a dented bumper and a dealership plate frame. North Hollow Motors. The same town stamped on Agnes's slip of paper. I traced the letters as if they could smudge into directions. A photograph wasn't just a memory. It was a map that refused to admit it was a map. I scanned the faces. My mother was looking down, her profile all caution and ache. The man, watched the door, jaw tense, as if ready to catch whatever came through it. The nun's eyes, though blurred, were alert, focused on the clipboard like it could absolve her. And beyond the glass of the hospital's double doors, a reflection, vague, spectral, of another woman, hair dark, shoulders hunched. Was that Ruth? Or the version of my mother, who could still run? I slid the photos back into the envelope and felt the weight of them change the room. It wasn't just proof anymore. It was acceleration. I wrote down Harper & Sons Photolab and North Hollow Motors in my notebook, then circled them until the ink bled. My next steps were suddenly practical. Find the lab, find the dealership, ask for old logs, hunt for dust that kept names. The phone rang as if on cue. Ruth's number. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message on speaker. "If you found the torn photograph, don't chase the lab," she said, breath tight. "They won't help you. The owner died years ago, and his son, well, he keeps the past like a dog keeps a bone." A beat. Be careful around men who inherit silence. The line cut. Advice, warning, prophecy, it all sounded the same. I looked again at the penciled fragment, GR, and felt the name bloom uninvited in my mouth. Grace. She existed on the page, and now between my ribs. I wondered if somewhere a woman with my mother's hands had a box of photos with their own torn edges, curated to exclude us. Pain makes curators of us all. Night edged in. I thumbed the back of the photo until the lab stamp felt carved into my skin. Then I noticed one last detail, the faint corner of a claim ticket stuck between the photo and its paper sleeve. I teased it free with the care of someone extracting a splinter from a sleeping child. Harper & Sons. Order number 4112. Date, January 5th, 1980. A month after the birth. After the leaving. I did what the living do when the dead leave breadcrumbs. I followed. The internet coughed up an address for Harper & Sons, now a camera repair shop, not a lab. I jotted down their hours. Closed Sundays, open early on weekdays. Today was Wednesday. I could be there by opening if I didn't sleep, and the road forgave me. I packed the envelope, the letters with the dried wine ribbon, and the notebook. Before turning off the light, I held the two photos up one last time. Seam to seam, the nun blooming once more in the center. "Front, do not show," the margin warned. "I'm sorry," I told the warning, and slid both into a hard plastic sleeve. Some instructions deserve disobedience. The house tried its usual lullaby, pipes, rafters, the polite clicks of a structure settling into its own memory, but nothing softened. I lay on the couch, shoes on, bag by the door, and watched headlights pass like migrating stars. Each one painted the ceiling with brief geography. If you read this, then I didn't find the courage to speak. The sentence returned again, faithful as a stray. At 4 in the morning, fatigue surrendered to purpose. I brewed coffee that tasted like penance and stood in front of the mirror by the hallway. The woman looking back had my mother's cheekbones and a stranger's steadiness. "Order 4112, I said to her. "North Hollow Motors. Sister Agnes." The name sounded like an invocation and a map. Dawn came thin and undecided. I locked the door, slid the photos into the inside pocket of my coat, and stepped into a morning that felt slightly overexposed. In the driveway, I hesitated, looking back at the window where my mother used to wave. Nothing moved, and yet I felt the smallest release, like a knot loosening somewhere inside the walls. On the road, the town peeled away into fields and power lines. The envelope warmed against my side, as if the paper had a pulse. I thought of the man with the half-turned smile and the letter signed with them. Of my father's silence, thick and survivable. Of Ruth, guarding half-truths because whole ones would drown her. And of the woman in the glass doors, reflection or witness, who almost looked like me. By the time the first stores opened their metal eyelids, I had reached the street where Harper and Sons used to develop other people's memories. A hand-painted sign hung crooked over the door, insistently present in a world that didn't need it anymore. I pushed inside, a bell tinkled, and a man behind the counter looked up with a tired suspicion of someone born into a legacy. "Help you?" he asked. His name tag said Evan Harper. I placed the claim ticket on the glass. "I'm looking for Order 4112, I said. He stared at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. "That's older than me," he said, trying for a joke and failing. "We don't keep those." I held his gaze. "Maybe you keep some." He sighed the way people do before they disobey a rule they invented to survive. "Basement," he muttered, and disappeared through a door marked Employees Only. I listened to the muffled argument of boxes and dust below. When he returned, he carried a gray archival bin like a casket he'd been asked to lift too often. "You didn't hear about this from me," he said, setting it down. Inside, manila envelopes slept like winter animals. 4108, 4109, 4110, 4111. My fingers paused. 4112. The envelope was thinner than I expected, lighter than it should have been. I opened it and found a work order, names blanked out with a strip of aged tape, and a handwritten note. "Hold it front. Pick up by Ruth." The breath left my body. Ruth had picked them up. "Is there more?" I asked. Evan shook his head. "Someone came years ago and cleared a lot of the old stuff, names I don't know. A woman. Knew exactly what numbers to ask for." He shrugged. "Seemed urgent." I closed the bin, heart stumbling toward anger. Ruth had warned me off the lab not to protect me, but to protect her trail. On my way out, Evan called after me. "We used to stamp our info on the backs if a dealership ad was in the frame," he said, pointing at my photo sleeve. "A cross-promo thing. Check under the light." I stopped, slid the larger photo free, and tilted it beneath the shop lamp. There it was, faint and stubborn. North Hollow Motors Sales P. Larson. I thanked him and stepped into a morning suddenly sharp. The photograph thrummed against my palm like a small engine. P. Larson. A new door. A new witness. And, somewhere at the end of these corridors, a woman named Grace breathing through a life built from carefully torn edges. I turned the photo over one more time and brushed my thumb across the pencil. Front, do not show. The warning had failed. The front would be shown. And what it revealed would send me next to the place where even paper had gone missing. The drive to North Hollow felt longer than it should have been. The highway stretched like a sentence with no punctuation, and the landscape outside blurred into a gray film strip of telephone poles and barns. Every mile carried the weight of unsaid words. The name P. Larson echoed in my head like an unfinished prayer. I didn't know who he was, only that he lived somewhere between my mother's secret and my sister's shadow. When I reached the outskirts of town, the first thing I saw was the old hospital. St. Vincent's loomed behind a fence, its windows like hollow eyes. The parking lot was half swallowed by weeds, but the front door still bore the imprint of years, paint worn away where desperate hands had once pushed through. I parked and sat there for a long moment, the engine ticking down, as if unsure whether to rest or run. Inside, the air was colder than it had any right to be. Someone had stripped the walls bare of signs and names, leaving only nails that pointed nowhere. I followed a corridor I didn't remember, guided by instinct, or maybe guilt's compass. The records office was exactly where Agnes had said it would be, but the desk was empty this time, the drawers half open, paper curled and yellowing. Behind the counter, I found a row of filing cabinets, chained shut. The padlocks looked new. A handwritten sign read, "Archives restricted. City authorization required." I almost laughed. Bureaucracy trying to guard ghosts. But one cabinet, the third from the left, had no chain. Its drawer gaped slightly, as if something or someone had pulled too hard and never bothered to fix it. I gripped the handle and slid it open. Dust rose like breath from a corpse. Inside were folders arranged by year, though many were missing. 1979 was there, but thin, suspiciously thin. My fingers itched. I flipped through. Birth logs, patient records, discharge slips. Then a gap, an abrupt skip from November 28th to December 10th. My mother's due date would have fallen between them. The missing pages were an absence that screamed. A folder labeled maternity ward. Winter 79 lay beneath. I opened it, pulse trembling. The first sheet was a roster of nurses and attending staff. I recognized Sister Agnes, and below her, in neat print, another name: P. Larson, administrative clerk. My heart stilled. He wasn't a doctor.
He was the man who signed people out.
The gatekeeper between birth and disappearance. I searched for any reference to my mother's name. Nothing. Her file had been plucked clean. I flipped the folder upside down, hoping for loose papers, and one did fall, a single page, half-torn. It bore the hospital letterhead, stamped copy, and one line of text still legible: patient requests non-disclosure. File transferred to Larson for private handling. The rest was shredded by time. But that line alone was confession enough. I took a photo of the document, hands shaking, and replaced it exactly as I found it. The silence around me thickened, as if the building knew what I'd taken. Then, faintly, from somewhere down the hall, I heard the scrape of a chair. I froze. "Hello," I called. The echo replied like mockery. Only when I turned toward the exit did I see a shadow flicker across the far doorway, tall, still, and gone in an instant. My footsteps quickened. By the time I reached the lobby, the air smelled of ozone and rot. I stepped outside, gulped sunlight like medicine. On the way back to my car, I glanced through the shattered window of the receptionist's booth. A single photo sat pinned to the corkboard inside, a staff picture, laminated, colors fading. There was Agnes, a few nurses, and a man in a brown suit, smiling too wide. P. Larson. I memorized his face. Thinning hair, crow's feet, eyes that smiled slower than his mouth. A salesman's charm. Beneath the picture, a calendar frozen on January 1980, the same month stamped on the photo order slip. Everything circled back, tighter and tighter, like a thread pulling skin closed. I took another photo and drove toward town. At the local records office, a young clerk barely looked up when I asked about P. Larson. "Retired," she said. "Lives out on Sycamore Street. Third house past the gas station." The coincidence hit like a slap. The same address Sister Agnes had written. Grace's first home. The circle wasn't widening anymore. It was collapsing inward. I thanked her and left, pulse echoing in my ears. Outside, clouds gathered like witnesses. The road to Sycamore Street was narrow, lined with skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. The houses grew smaller, quieter, as if sound itself avoided this place. At the corner, an old sign read, "North Hollow Motors, EST 1975. The dealership was closed, windows boarded, but the logo matched the one on the photo's reflection. I stopped in front of the third house after the gas station. White paint peeling, mailbox rusted, curtains drawn. A nameplate hung crooked beside the door. Larson. I wanted to knock, but my hands refused. What if he was dead? What if he wasn't? What if he remembered my mother's eyes and saw them now in mine? The doorbell was missing its button. I rapped on the wood instead. No answer. Only the faint sound of something moving inside, slow, deliberate. Then a man's voice, low and rough. "You shouldn't have come." My heart stuttered. The door opened a few inches, enough to reveal a sliver of his face, older, heavier, but unmistakable. "Mr. Larson?" I said. He studied me for a long, unbearable moment. "She promised no one would look," he said. "But you did." I stepped closer. "You handle my mother's file. Winter of 79. I just need to know what happened." He shook his head. "Records go missing for a reason." His voice cracked under the weight of memory. "Sometimes mercy means paper burns." I held up the photograph. "You were there." His eyes softened just a fraction. So was she. And so was the girl. Lightning broke somewhere behind the clouds. Grace, I whispered. The name hit him like confession. He closed his eyes, nodded once. Beautiful child, he said quietly. Didn't deserve the world we were giving her. I swallowed. Where did she go? For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from decades away, he said, You're too late. But she's not far. I stepped closer. Please, I said. Tell me. He looked past me, toward the road, where rain had begun to fall. Find a house on Sycamore that doesn't belong. You'll know it when you see it. His voice dropped. But remember, truth doesn't knock politely. It breaks in. Then he shut the door, leaving me on the porch with thunder for company. Rain soaked through my coat as I stood there, trying to breathe. The streets stretched silent, indifferent. I looked toward the row of houses, one pale blue, one brown, one gray with boarded windows. And then, at the very end, one that seemed newer, too clean, too perfect among the rot. The house that didn't belong. Grace's house. Or her ghost's. The rain followed me to the end of Sycamore Street, its rhythm steady, like a heartbeat I'd borrowed from someone else. The house Larson had mentioned stood out even in the dull wash of afternoon gray, white siding too new, roof too neat, porch too proud. The others on the street sagged under years of weather and regret, but this one refused to age. It didn't belong. That alone made it the right place. I parked across the road, engine humming like hesitation. Curtains hung in every window, identical, beige, closed too tightly. There was no mailbox, only a brass slot built into the door, as if the house had something to hide. My hands gripped the wheel. What if Grace wasn't here? What if she was, but the world had already done its damage? The rain thickened, drumming against the windshield like a dare. I stepped out, water pooling around my shoes. Every sound felt magnified, the creak of the porch boards, the sigh of the gutters, my own breath. The nameplate beside the door read, H. Collins. Not Grace. Not my mother's name. Still, something about the H tugged at me, the way threads pull from seams. I reached for the doorbell, found it intact this time, and pressed. The chime echoed through the house, soft and low. No answer. I pressed again. A shadow moved behind the curtain, small, deliberate. Then the door opened, just a fraction, enough for a woman's eyes to find mine. Hazel eyes, sharp but cautious. Can I help you? She asked. Her voice was warm and brittle at once, the kind that breaks people's hearts without meaning to. I'm sorry to bother you, I said, rain dripping from my hair. I'm looking for someone who might have lived here before. Or maybe still does. She studied me, the corner of her mouth tightening, as if weighing whether I was a threat or an omen. No one lived here before me, she said finally. I bought the place 8 years ago. Her gaze lingered. You're soaked. Come in. Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine and candle wax. The living room was clean, almost too clean. No clutter, no photographs, no hint of a past. She handed me a towel, then sat across from me, legs crossed, expression guarded. You said you were looking for someone, she said. Who? I hesitated, fingers tightening around the envelope in my coat. Her name was Grace. Something flickered behind her eyes, a shadow, a recognition. It passed quickly, but not quickly enough. Grace, she repeated softly. That's a beautiful name. Her tone was careful, rehearsed. I watched her closely. You remind me of someone, I said. My mother, maybe, or myself. She smiled without warmth.
People say that sometimes.
Faces carry echoes. I opened the envelope, slid the photograph across the table. The one of my mother outside St. Vincent's. Do you know this woman? I asked. She leaned closer, eyes scanning the image, the way someone reads a poem they've already memorized. Her fingers trembled before she pulled them back. No, she said too quickly.
Sorry.
Should I? I shook my head, heart pounding. Maybe not. I reached for the photo, but she stopped me. Her voice had dropped. Where did you get this? I looked at her, unsure whether to lie. For my mother's things, I said. She passed away recently. The woman's expression softened, something fragile cracking beneath the surface. I'm sorry, she whispered. Silence stretched, heavy and human. I glanced toward the mantel. Only one framed picture stood there. A girl, maybe 6 years old, dark curls, and a missing front tooth. The frame was turned slightly away from the room, as if it didn't want to be seen. Your daughter?
I asked.
Her lips parted, but the answer took too long. My niece, she said finally. She lives with me. Footsteps padded down the hall, small and quick. The little girl appeared in the doorway, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She looked at me with wide, curious eyes too familiar. My pulse faltered. Hazel, yes, but rimmed with a dark ring I'd seen every morning in my own reflection. She smiled shyly.
Hi, she said.
My throat closed. Hi, I managed to whisper back. The woman, Grace, though she hadn't admitted it, stood quickly, resting a hand on the girl's shoulder. Why don't you go back to your room, sweetheart, she said softly. The child obeyed, the rabbit trailing behind. When she was gone, Grace turned back to me, her mask slipping. You shouldn't have come, she said, voice trembling. He told me you would one day. My blood ran cold. Larson?
I asked.
She shook her head.
No.
The man from the hospital. The one who took me away. He said someday a woman would come, asking about December of '79. He said I'd know her when I saw her. Her eyes locked on mine. And I did. My heart ached. You knew? She nodded. Not at first. But dreams have been warning me for years. I leaned forward, desperate. I'm your sister. The words fell heavy between us, undeniable and alive. She flinched, tears glimmering at the edge of her lashes. I figured, she whispered. You have her hands. The same trembling when you're trying to be brave. I laughed softly through the tears I didn't realize were falling.
She wrote about you.
In her letter. Grace turned away, shoulders shaking.
She came once, she said.
I was too young to remember, but my adoptive mother told me later. Said she stood outside the fence, watching me play. Didn't say a word. She wiped her eyes. I used to dream about her face before I ever saw that photo. I wanted to reach out, to close the years between us. But Grace took a step back. If you came here for closure, you won't find it, she said. There's more to this than a hidden birth. He, Larson, wasn't working alone. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Her gaze shifted toward the window, where rain still fell. You'll find out soon. The truth's bigger than both of us. Before I could ask, the little girl's voice echoed down the hall. Aunt Grace. My heart stopped. She hadn't called her Helen. She'd said Grace. The woman froze, realizing it too. I met her eyes. She knows your name, I whispered. Grace's silence was confirmation. She shouldn't, she said. I never told her. Outside, thunder rolled closer, shaking the windows. The photograph still lay on the table, edges damp from our hands. The pencil marks at the bottom looked clearer now under the lamp. GR, and below it, faint but certain, another word written later, by a different hand. Grace. The name written twice. Once to hide, once to be found. That night, I couldn't leave. Grace insisted I stay, though the word insisted didn't sound like kindness. It sounded like precaution. The rain had thickened into a storm, and the windows shivered under the wind. She gave me a blanket and led me down the hall to the guest room. It used to be my mother's sewing room, she said softly. I kept it the same. I hesitated at the doorway, sensing the air shift. Cooler, denser, almost deliberate. The room felt untouched by time. White lace curtains. A small oak desk. A sewing machine that could have been my mother's twin. Even the smell, lavender and starch, brought me back to childhood evenings when she worked in silence while the radio whispered hymns. You still sew? I asked. Grace shook her head. No. I don't come in here much. The temperature never changes. Even in summer, it stays cold. I touched the window pane. It was cool enough to fog with my breath. Maybe bad insulation, I said, trying to sound rational. But the chill had a weight, not the kind that came from broken seals or drafts. It pressed inward, like memory condensed into air. Grace stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Sometimes I think she's here," she murmured. "Not haunting, just keeping something." When she left me alone, I sat on the edge of the bed and unfolded my mother's letter once more. The words looked different now, more deliberate. "If you read this, then I didn't find the courage to speak. I pray you find the courage to look." I whispered the line aloud. The lamp flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. The cold deepened, threading through my bones like a slow verdict. I tried to distract myself. Open drawers, lifted lids. Inside the desk, spools of thread still gleamed, untouched, arranged by color. Beneath them, a small wooden box with a rusted latch. My heart picked up. The lock was already broken. I opened it, expecting needles or buttons, but instead found a folded envelope, brittle and yellowed, my mother's handwriting faint but familiar. For Grace. I stared at it for a long moment before calling out, "Grace?" No response. I stepped into the hall, but her bedroom door was shut, light off beneath. I hesitated, then returned to the room, the envelope trembling in my hands. The paper inside was fragile, words fading at the edges. "My dearest Grace," it began. "You were born in winter, when the world was quiet enough to hear what hearts refused to say. I hope you never learned silence the way I did." Tears blurred my vision. The next lines were shakier. "They told me I couldn't keep you. That love wasn't reason enough. I believed them because I was afraid. But every year since, I've sewn you into something, curtains, dresses, bedsheets, so you would always have a place here, even if you never knew it." I looked around. The lace curtains, the bedspread, the fabric folded on the chair, all sewn by her, all keeping Grace warm without her knowing. The final lines nearly undid me. "If she ever finds this room, tell her I never left. The cold will know her name before you do." The lamp flickered again, the light thinning to a trembling glow. My breath fogged visibly now, though the storm outside had calmed. I whispered, "You're here, aren't you?" The air answered with a faint rustle, the curtains shifting though the window was closed. I pressed the letter to my chest. "She forgave you," I said into the stillness. "And I think she forgave herself." The sewing machine clicked once, metal against metal, though no hand touched it. A single spool of thread rolled from the desk, unraveling across the floor until it reached my feet. Pale blue, the same color as the blanket from the photograph. I followed it with my eyes, half expecting it to spell something, half afraid it would. Grace's voice startled me. "You found it!" She stood in the doorway, her face pale in the dim light. "I've looked for that letter for years." I held it out. "She wrote it for you." Grace stepped forward but didn't take it. "I wasn't ready before. Maybe I'm still not." Her gaze drifted to the sewing machine. "She used to hum when she worked, didn't she?" I nodded. "Always the same melody." Grace smiled faintly, eyes wet. "I hear it sometimes. Especially here. My daughter says the room sings." I looked at her. "You said she was your niece." Grace's expression hardened. "It's complicated." I waited. She took a long breath. "I adopted her after my sister died. My adoptive sister. But she's different. She remembers things she shouldn't." The thread tightened suddenly, pulling itself taut, snapping with a sharp sound that made both of us jump. The spool stopped spinning, but the end of the thread pointed toward the closet door. Grace's eyes widened. "It's always coldest there," she whispered. I stood, my pulse drumming. Maybe she left something else. Grace shook her head.
"No."
I checked. "It's empty." I opened the closet anyway. The cold poured out like a sigh. Inside hung 2 coats, one child-sized, one adult, and behind them, the faint outline of something stitched into the wallpaper. I ran my hand over it, felt the uneven texture of fabric beneath paint. Carefully, I peeled a corner loose. Underneath was a square of cloth sewn directly to the wall. Faded embroidery spelled a single word, Grace. Grace gasped behind me. "She did sew me into this place," she whispered. I turned to her. Maybe this is what she meant, the cold keeping your name. She nodded, tears breaking free. I used to have dreams, she said, of a room that knew me before I was born. I thought they were just dreams. She reached for the cloth, fingers trembling, but they were memories. The lamp flickered once more, then steadied. The chill began to ease, the air warming almost imperceptibly. Grace folded the fabric corner back into place, as if tucking her name back where it belonged. She can rest now, she said. And maybe we can too. I held the letter out again. This time, Grace took it. Her hands didn't shake anymore. As I left the room, I glanced back. The sewing machine sat still, thread coiled neatly. Yet for a heartbeat, I swore I heard a faint hum, the melody our mother always sang when she wanted time to forgive her. It lingered just long enough to follow me into the hallway, soft and familiar, as if whispering thank you in a language only daughters understand. Morning came thin and metallic, as if the storm had left filings of itself in the air. Grace brewed coffee we didn't drink, our hands wrapped around cups for heat, not comfort. The sewing room felt warmer, but something in the hallway stayed listening. We should go to the church by St. Vincent's, I said, voice steadying itself. A priest signed something, Grace whispered, unsure how she knew. Her eyes found the envelope marked for Grace, and didn't look away. We left before the house could change its mind. The church hunched at the end of a block of tired shops and a pawn sign that never slept. Stone worn thin by weather and routine, doors heavy with the weight of hands. Inside, the light was kinder than the windows promised, gold dust afloat like held breath. Candles burned in rows, each flame a private argument with silence. We sat 2 pews back, grief between us like a folded coat. A side door opened with a hinge that remembered names. An old priest stepped out, eyes too awake for morning. He took us in as if we had been announced by our posture. I'm Father O'Malley, he said, the syllables careful, like lifting china. We're looking for records, I answered. Winter of '79, St. Vincent's. His gaze sharpened and softened at once, a practiced contradiction. Most memories from that winter refuse to sit still, he said. Some are sealed by law, some by mercy, some by cowardice. He did not invite us to leave. I placed the photo on the rail between us, the nun mid-syllable. He didn't touch it. He bowed to it almost, as if acknowledging a relic. Agnes, he murmured, a name worn smooth by prayer. She kept ledgers in her pocket when the hospital stopped keeping truth. He looked at Grace, then at me, the recognition slow, unsentimental. Your mother came here once and did not kneel. She stood and hummed, and I pretended not to hear. We need more than hymns, I said. We need a name. He inhaled like a man reaching for a stair in the dark. Names are doors, he said. I was taught to keep them locked. Today, his voice thinned. I can hold the door while you look. He led us to the sacristy, where incense remembered every season. A small iron box waited beneath a worn cassock. He produced a key too old to be recent and too recent to be safe. The ledger inside had edges like parchment bitten by time, columns of baptisms and asterisks that meant don't ask in public. December '79 had been sewn tighter than the rest, ink darker, lines more careful. A single entry sat between 2 blank spaces like a tooth that didn't belong. Infant female, provisional name, Helen. Sponsor P. Larson. Notation, private placement, see attached. But the attachment was gone, corner ripped, thread clinging to paper. Why provisional? I asked, though my chest already knew. Because stories were rewritten before they learned to speak, he said. Some adoptions needed baptisms to match new papers. His finger hovered over Helen, trembled, stopped. Her mother wanted Grace, he added, not reading, remembering. She said the world had taken the word from her and she was stealing it back. The book learned 2 names that day. Grace closed her eyes, and I heard the sewing room hum in my head. Father O'Malley turned one more page and found nothing but absence. Agnes kept copies, he said, but not here. She was smarter than me. Smarter than all of us, he corrected, a tired smile that didn't land. He closed the ledger as if tucking in a restless child. I broke no seal by letting you read what the world already decided. Confession is another geography. We followed him down a narrow hall to a small office with a window like a wound. He opened a drawer, then another, each filled with the evidence of older battles. At the bottom, a plain envelope bore a hand that wasn't afraid to be read. To the one who asks about Winter 79, it said. Agnes left this before her hands forgot letters, O'Malley whispered. He set it on the desk and stepped aside. I won't watch you open it, but I will stand near. Inside lay a photocopy stamped hospital transfer, private handling. Beneath, a second page. Benefactors Benevolent Society, disbursement ledger. Dates, some totals, initials disguised as good deeds. At the bottom, 2 signatures braided like a dare P. Larson and E. Harper. The photo lab's surname thudded against the table. A single rosary bead rolled from the envelope and stopped at Grace's wrist. On the margin, in Agnes's scratch, one more line. Not charity, cover. Father O'Malley didn't touch the papers. He touched the desk with reverence. We baptized under Helen to match the court order, he admitted. The judge believed names could erase origins if written slow enough. His mouth pulled tight around memory. I should have refused. I told myself I was protecting a child from scandal. He shook his head as if trying to loosen a knot that had set in bone. I was protecting men from consequence. Who else? I asked. Larson, Harper, who signed the order? Names that still sponsor galas, he said, and the word galas broke in his mouth. A doctor who lost no patience on paper. A lawyer who learned to bill silence by the hour. A judge who loved the taste of sealed envelopes. He looked at Grace. They will not remember you. That's how they planned it. He turned the ledger back to December and tapped the margin twice. A faint indentation, as if a word had been written and then lifted away. He slipped carbon paper beneath, pressed the page with a soft graphite rub. A ghost rose where the ink refused to. Grace. And beneath it, in another hand, Helen. 2 names sharing the same space without touching. A sacrament of erasures. Grace swallowed, eyes on the apparition of her name. My daughter dreams this place sings, she whispered, almost to herself. Father O'Malley studied her, recognition traveling slowly across his face. Children are poor accomplices to forgetting, he said. She won't learn your version unless you teach it first. Grace nodded, jaw steadying. She will learn mine. He slid the envelope back toward me, not away. I can't give you more without waking people who sleep on piles of paper. But there's a registry no one closed, dealership deliveries, city records, 2 towns over. Owners liked their names beside machines, he added, weary amusement brief and old. Find a car from the photograph, he said, and you'll find who drove it home. His eyes lowered. If it was mercy, it would need less bookkeeping. Go before I remember what I'm not allowed to do. We stepped into a noon that pretended to be gentle. The church doors sighed behind us like a lung that had done enough. On the steps, Grace touched the bead in her palm as if checking a pulse. E. Harper, I said, feeling the camera shop air in my throat again. P. Larson.
Judge. Doctor.
Lawyer. A society pretending to be benevolent. The train called from somewhere we couldn't see. Its note sounded like an answer we'd already decided to accept. We walked without talking, papers pressed against my ribs like an extra bone. 2 towns over, Grace repeated, testing the distance in her mouth. City records, I said. The kind no one expects anyone to want. She glanced back at the church once, not in anger, not in gratitude. Do you believe him? She asked. I believe his ledger, I said. And Agnes. Men forget. Paper limps. Women remember. At the corner, Wind lifted a flyer from a telephone pole and pasted it to my leg. A charity gala. Dates and names dressed in serif fonts. The doctor. The judge. The lawyer's firm glittering like a chandelier. Grace peeled it off, folded it twice, then again, until it fit small. Souvenir, she said, voice level. Reminder, I said, voice lower. We both meant Target. Back in a car, the map app traced a thin line to a city that didn't know us yet. The road logged miles like a clerk with better handwriting than Mercy. I thought of my father's silence and how carefully he'd tended it. What had he known, and how had the knowledge fed him or starved him? Next chapter, next door, next name. Courage had started to look like errands. I drove. In the rearview mirror, the church grew small until it was memory-shaped. A final candle in the vestibule tried to outshine daylight and failed with grace. Wax had dripped in 2 parallel lines down its side, neat as ledger columns. 2 names that were one life, refusing to merge. Grace traced them in the air without touching. "We're not done," she said. "No," I answered. "But we're finally on the record." The highway opened like a page no one had dared to write on. Clouds stacked, tall and generous, as if offering shade to what came next. I placed Agnes's envelope on the dashboard and buckled it in. Some passengers are carried, some carry you. The needle of the speedometer lifted, obedient and brave. Beside me, Grace exhaled, a sound like a stitch finally lying flat. Some truths don't just remember, they keep score. We drove in silence for miles, the road unspooling beneath us, like a confession no one wanted to finish. The rain had stopped, but its ghost clung to the windshield, smearing the world into watercolors. Grace sat beside me, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the fogged glass. Every so often, she'd look at me, start to speak, then stop, like someone standing at the edge of a memory too deep to wade into. When we reached the outskirts of our hometown, I felt something shift inside me. The landscape looked smaller, as if grief had drained its color. "We should see him," I said quietly. Grace didn't ask who. She already knew. My father's house stood at the end of a dirt road, where silence had always lived comfortably. The same chipped mailbox. The same wilted rose bushes. Time hadn't passed here. It had settled. The porch groaned under our weight. Through the window, I saw him sitting in his chair, newspaper folded, glasses low on his nose. He looked older, yes, but not frielier, just denser, like stone. When I knocked, he didn't look surprised. "You found her," he said before I spoke. His voice was low, heavy, and familiar in its distance. "Of course you did. You always finish what your mother starts." Grace froze beside me. "You knew?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, walked to the mantel, and lit a cigarette he didn't need. Smoke curled around him like punctuation. "I knew enough to keep quiet," he said finally. "Enough to hate the sound of my own name." I wanted to shout, to demand how he could live with that, but my throat betrayed me. I just whispered, "Why?" He looked at me then, eyes sharp but hollow. "Because truth doesn't raise children. Stability does. Your mother understood that, even when it broke her." He took a drag, exhaled, and for a moment I saw regret there, raw and flickering. "She told me after," he continued. "Said she'd given the child to Mercy. I told her Mercy had better timing than love." Grace stepped forward. "I'm that child." His jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "I know," he said softly. "You have her eyes. The same way they forgive before they understand." Grace looked down, fighting tears. I wanted to hold her hand, but something about the moment felt sacred in its discomfort. "You could have told me," I said. "You let me grow up believing our family began and ended with us." He nodded slowly. "That's what families do. They choose the smaller lie." I looked around the room. Photographs lined the walls, but none after my mother's death. He'd fossilized his life the day she left him for the grave. "Did you love her?" I asked. He gave a dry laugh. "Love? I worshipped her. And that was my mistake. Worship doesn't forgive imperfection, it punishes it." He sat down, shoulders slumping. "When I found out, I wanted to destroy everything that reminded me of her. But the house refused to burn." Grace walked toward the mantel, touching one of the framed photos. "She looked happy," she whispered. My father's eyes softened. "That was before winter." He rubbed his temple. You have no idea what that season cost us. People think silence is passive. It's not. It's work. It's holding your breath until everyone else stops asking questions. He glanced at me. And now you've come to break it. Yes, I said. Because silence didn't protect anyone. He nodded slowly, like a man reading the last page of a long book. No, he said. But it delayed the pain long enough for you to survive it. The clock ticked once, loudly, the sound slicing through the air. I noticed the hands frozen at 11:41, the same time as the kitchen clock at my mother's house. You never fixed it, I said. He smiled faintly. Some things are meant to move again. Grace sat opposite him, her voice steady despite the tremor underneath. She wrote me a letter, she said. She said she sewed me into the house, into the curtains and sheets. His cigarette trembled in his hand. She did that, he whispered. After the adoption. Every stitch was penance. She believed the needle could forgive what her hands couldn't. He looked away. I used to hear her humming in her sleep, even when she stopped sewing. I felt tears sting my eyes. You punished her for it. He didn't deny it. I punished myself, he said. I thought distance was justice. Turns out it's just another way to pray. He rubbed his chest, as if trying to calm a memory lodged there. When she died, I almost told you everything. But then I saw her funeral, how quiet it was, and thought maybe the silence could die with her. I was wrong. Grace stood. There's more, she said. The priest. The records. The people who paid for it. His eyes flicked up sharply. Names. Larson. Harper. A judge. His face went pale, and the cigarette burned down to his fingers before he noticed. He crushed it in the ashtray. They told me it was done legally, he said, almost to himself. That no one would get hurt. He laughed bitterly. That's what they always say before they build their kingdoms on paper. I stepped closer. You knew Larson? He nodded once. He worked for the society. Came to the house the night before she gave birth. Said they could help her keep it quiet. She begged me to let her go through with it. Said she couldn't bear to raise a child made of both sin and love. His voice cracked on the last word. I let her believe it was the only way. Grace whispered. It wasn't. He closed his eyes. I know. The air between us thickened with everything unsaid. The old floorboards groaned, as if they too were tired of carrying so much truth. You can still make it right, I said. Tell someone what happened. He shook his head slowly. No one listens to dying men with dusty stories. They call it family history, not evidence. He looked at me then, something pleading behind his exhaustion. But you could finish it. Grace frowned. Finish what? He gestured toward the locked cabinet beside his chair. The box. Everything they gave me to keep her quiet. My pulse quickened. What's inside?
He sighed.
Copies of the adoption papers. Letters. Receipts. Enough to make the benevolent society remember their sins. He coughed, the sound rattling in his chest. I thought I was burying guilt. Turns out, I was archiving it. I knelt beside the cabinet. The key hung from a nail above the fireplace, right where my mother used to keep her rosary. When I unlocked it, the hinges shrieked like something waking from sleep. Inside, folders bound in twine, envelopes stamped confidential, and a photograph I wasn't prepared for. My mother holding a newborn, eyes red but smiling. The date scrawled on the back, December 5th, 1979. Grace covered her mouth. That's me. My father's eyes shimmered, the dam finally cracking. She asked me to take the photo, he whispered. Said she wanted proof that she wasn't a coward. I never printed the second copy. He slumped in his chair, the strength leaving his body like breath escaping glass. Now you both have the proof. Do with it what I never could. I placed the photograph in my bag, beside Agnes's ledger and the society's records. We'll expose them, I said. For her. For you. He smiled weakly. Don't do it for me. Do it because silence gets passed down like inheritance. Break it, or it becomes yours. Grace nodded, eyes glistening. We'll finish it, she said. Together. As we left, I looked back one last time. My father sat in his chair, head bowed, cigarette smoke curling into the afternoon light. The clock still read 11:41. He didn't move, and I didn't make him. Some reconciliations are better left unfinished. They echo longer that way. When the door closed behind us, the house exhaled, slow and weary. Grace slipped her hand into mine. "You think he'll ever forgive himself?" she asked. I shook my head. "Maybe forgiveness isn't the point," I said. "Maybe remembering is." The road out of town unrolled, like a ribbon someone finally decided to pull. No radio, only the engine and the soft rasp of paper against my coat. Agnes's envelope rode buckled in the back seat like a small, serious passenger. Beside me, Grace kept the photograph on her lap, fingers worrying the sleeve. We didn't practice what to say next. We practiced breathing at the same time. 2 hours isn't far on a map, but grief adds tolls no one warns you about. Every mile felt like permission and an indictment. We planned our errand like a heist of memory. First stop, North Hollow Motors, whatever was left of it. Second, City Records, where ledgers outlive their authors. If the car in the photo was the thread, the title would be the knot. Names prefer to hide in clerks' drawers and carbon copies. We would ask for both politely and, if needed, with faithless patience. Moving forward had become our only prayer. The dealership sat at the edge of an empty lot, windows boarded like eyelids. A hand-painted sign still clung to the roofline, letters sunblood but stubborn. A garage next door kept half-hours and ghosts. A bell announced us anyway. An old mechanic looked up from a carburetor, as if from a novel. "Harper sent you?" he asked, wiping his hands. "Sort of," I said, and laid the photo down on the counter. He studied it the way men study roads they used to take. 79, he said, tapping the dented bumper like it still hurt. Larson moved that one himself. Said it was special inventory. The word special landed with the weight of euphemism. "Do any sales records survive?" I asked. He nodded toward a metal filing cabinet against the far wall. "City closed the place. I rescued what they forgot to chain." He handed me a ring of keys that had opinions about every lock. The cabinet surrendered on the third try, coughing dust and dates. Folders marched by month. January 1980 limped but remained. Inside, index cards with neat block letters and impatient pencil marks. One card stopped the air. Order 4112, pale sedan, sales P. Larson. Buyer, H. Collins. Notation, Benevolent Society voucher applied. My chest tightened as the past printed itself in present tense. Grace traced the H with a finger that didn't quite touch. "She was Helen here," I said, hearing Father O'Malley in the echo. 2 names in one body, 2 lives stapled together by other people. On the back, a receipt number matched Agnes's disbursement ledger. Paper recognizing its own reflection, across decades. I photographed both sides until my hand steadied. The mechanic watched us with a kindness that didn't pry. "Whatever you're fixing," he said, "don't forget to drive it after." We thanked him with the only currency that mattered, attention. Outside, the sky had turned the color of courthouse paint. Grace folded the photo sleeve closed like a finished letter. "We go to records," she said, voice steadying into purpose. "Titles, transfers, anything with a stamp that thinks it's a fact." I nodded, and the car obeyed when I asked it to believe us. The highway took us in without questions. City Hall wore columns like excuses, and a clock that lied politely. Security warned us as if truth were a medal we might sneak inside. A directory pointed vehicle registry toward the basement like a secret. The clerk at the counter chewed a mint and time at the same rhythm. "Old titles?" I asked. "January 1980. Transfer from dealer to private." "Form 37B, she said, sliding paper toward me like a dare. I filled it with the care of someone inscribing a gravestone. Microfiche readers glowed in a dim room that smelled of film and patience. Reels clicked, frames skittered, dates jittered across the glass like minnows. Then, North Hollow Motors Collins Helen, a line that hummed. Below it, temporary custodian P. Larson for 3 days before transfer. A judge's stamp leaned heavy in the corner, the ink still bossy. The same surname from the gala flyer Father O'Malley hated to pronounce. I printed copies that shook a little as they cooled. Grace stared at the page like at a sonogram of her previous life. She didn't cry. The room did it for her. Lights humming too loud. Temporary custodian, she said, the syllables bitter but precise. Like I was furniture, she added, not asking for an argument. I slid the copies into Agnes's envelope. Paper accepted paper. Birth records? I asked the air, knowing the answer. Sealed, the air replied, in the clerk's voice through a wall. Back upstairs, the mint-chewing clerk had become a woman with a name tag. E. Turner watched us arrive at her window with the slow caution of prey. Births and adoptions are sealed, she said before I spoke, as if trained. We're not asking to open, I answered. We're asking to know if they exist. Her eyes flicked to the photograph in Grace's hands, then to me. Something in her posture changed, the way people stand when memory taps. Come back at 4:30, she whispered. With fewer witnesses. We killed an hour walking like people who had forgotten how to sit. A diner sold us coffee that understood its assignment. Heat, not flavor. Grace studied a local paper's society page like an enemy map. The judge's last name shown in serif next to a charity auction. I folded the page down to the face that matched the stamp. Some names hide, others preen. Both leave ink. At 4:29 we were shadows, near the records door. E. Turner reappeared wearing the same face and a different courage. She locked the front, unlocked the side, and kept her voice low. I could lose my job, she said, but I won't lose my sleep. She led us through stacks that smelled like damp and verdicts. At a table, she set down a battered binder labeled index, sealed. Indexes aren't secrets, she said. They're directions to them. Her finger moved with the precision of regret. December 1979, female, provisional, Helen, mother, redacted, handling, Larson. Another line, written later, as if ashamed to arrive, alias, Grace. Turner exhaled, a sound too small for the information it carried. I knew Sister Agnes, she said suddenly, and it wasn't a tangent. She used to leave notes inside hymnals when the city refused her letters. She called it smuggling daylight. Grace's hands found the edge of the table and held on. Can you print this? I asked, already knowing no. Turner shook her head. I can't print what doesn't exist. But she tore a page from her own notebook, wrote 3 names and an address.
Doctor.
Lawyer. Judge, she said, each word paying for a sin. Start with the lawyer's archive. He saves everything he plans to deny. She slid the paper toward us like a lifeboat. The building announced closing time with a bell that pretended to be gentle. Turner gathered the binder as if tucking in a restless child. I never said yes, she murmured, but I didn't say no loud enough. At the door, she paused, eyes on Grace. Your name is not a crime, she said, as if correcting a form. Grace nodded, the motion small and sovereign. We stepped into evening that had been waiting to be useful. On the steps, traffic performed its tired ballet. A bus exhaled. A bike complained at a light. A woman laughed into a phone. The city didn't care, it had just confessed a little. We cared enough for 3 cities. I folded Turner's note into the envelope with the rest of our contraband. Tomorrow, the lawyer, I said. Grace looked past me, toward a building across the square, and stilled. Through a 3rd-floor window, a portrait hung above shelves of immaculate boxes. The plaque below it gleamed, even at this distance, like a dare with polish. The surname matched the judge's stamp and the gala page, and the ledger's echo. Ink had learned to build architecture. Do you see it? Grace asked, not breaking her gaze. Yes, I said, feeling the chapter turn in my hands. And I think someone inside already saw us. We hadn't planned to see her again. The city was behind us, its lights shrinking in the rearview mirror, when Grace's phone buzzed, an unknown number. She answered without hesitation, instinct moving faster than reason. The voice was low, urgent, familiar. Turner, she said. I need to see you. Not at the office. The line went dead before Grace could reply. The silence that followed was louder than the rain starting again. We drove back under a sky the color of wet iron. The streets gleamed with puddles reflecting half-truths. Turner's message came through as we parked outside the courthouse. Back entrance. Alone. I looked at Grace.
She's scared, I said.
Grace nodded. People with truth always are. We left the car and moved through the alley, footsteps sinking with the sound of water dripping from rusted gutters. The back door creaked open before we knocked. Turner stood inside, pale under the flicker of fluorescent light. Her coat was wrinkled, her hair damp. They know, she said without greeting. The moment I pulled that binder, someone called from upstairs. No one should have known that fast. She glanced around, voice dropping. I think the society still funds this building, under a different name. Grace stiffened. You're saying they still exist? Turner nodded. Not as charity now. As a foundation. The Harper Larson Trust for Maternal Health. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Same initials. Same board. Different century. She pulled a folder from her bag. I took this before they could lock me out. It's a cross-reference of donations and sealed cases. Your mother's file isn't unique. There are dozens. She spread the papers across a metal table. Each page bore lines of names, codes, and handwritten notes. I scanned them until one column stopped me cold. Destination, and beside it, addresses, all from different states. They relocated the children, I whispered. Turner nodded. Adoptions through private channels. Some legal, some adjusted. Her hands trembled. Your mother wasn't a mistake. She was part of a program. Grace looked sick. Program. Turner met her eyes. They called it the Benevolence Initiative. It was meant to reassign children from families deemed unstable, unmarried mothers, widows, immigrants, all under the promise of better homes. Records were destroyed to protect confidentiality. Her voice cracked. But it was theft, Grace. Systematic, sanctified theft. I felt my knees weaken. Who ran it? Turner hesitated, then said, the judge whose name was on your birth transfer. He chaired the society's legal committee. His wife oversaw the foster network. And Harper. He financed the logistics through the photo lab, laundering funds as equipment purchases. She took a breath that didn't steady her. Larson was just the courier. The man who made the papers look clean. Grace whispered. And our mother? Turner's eyes softened. She tried to expose them. That's why the hospital let her go. Agnes hid what she could, but your mother was too close. The society called it hysteria. They always do, when women get too brave. She gestured to the folder. That letter you found wasn't just confession, it was evidence. And now that evidence is missing from their archives. A sound echoed from the corridor, a door closing too carefully. Turner froze. We can't stay, she said. They monitor the security cameras. If they trace me, I'm finished. She shoved the folder into my hands. There's an address in there. The Trust's new headquarters, downtown, under the name HL Foundation. Go there tomorrow, but not through the front. Grace asked, What about you? Turner gave a tight smile. I'll disappear for a while. I have a sister in Maine. If I can make it there. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pressed a small key into my palm. Locker 312 at the train station. Everything I couldn't print. Her eyes shimmered. Don't come until daylight. Before we could answer, the hallway lights dimmed, flickered, then went out. Only the red glow of an exit sign remained. Turner grabbed her bag. They're here, she hissed. We bolted through the service door, rain cutting our faces. I looked back once, Turner still at the threshold, eyes wide, whispering something I couldn't hear over the thunder. Then the door slammed, sealing her in shadow. We didn't stop running until the car was in sight. My hands shook as I turned the key. Grace's face was pale, her breath quick. She knew too much, she said. She still helped us. The wipers struggled against the storm, smearing light into streaks. We'll find her tomorrow, I said. and the locker. But both of us knew the odds of finding Turner again were thinner than paper. By the time we reached the motel, the folder was soaked at the edges. I spread the pages on the desk, flattening them gently with a towel. Each line looked like an accusation whispered in bureaucratic ink. Grace sat beside me, silent, eyes fixed on one particular entry, case 11/04GR. That's her code, she said. G for Grace. R for Ruth. My stomach twisted. Aunt Ruth. We searched the cross-reference column, and there it was, Facilitator, R. Collins. Grace's hand trembled. She signed off on it, she whispered. Ruth helped them. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. Maybe they used her name. But the handwriting beside it was familiar, small, neat, and deliberate. The same script that once signed birthday cards with hearts instead of dots. She said she only kept the letters, Grace murmured. That she didn't destroy them because she wanted someone to know. Her voice cracked. But she lied. I didn't know what to say. Betrayal, I realized, had layers like fabric, stitched tight enough to look like love. I folded the folder shut before we could read any more. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The motel's neon sign buzzed, half-broken, casting the room in uneven pink. Grace lay back on the bed, eyes open but far away. Do you think Turner will make it? She asked. I wanted to lie, but the truth had already spoiled us. If anyone can, I said. She knows how to vanish. I placed the key Turner had given me on the nightstand. Its brass gleamed dully under the flickering light. Locker 312, I whispered. Tomorrow. Grace turned her head, her expression unreadable. If we're still being watched, she said, they'll be waiting. I nodded slowly. Then we'll stop running. The wind outside shifted, carrying the low moan of a train passing somewhere beyond the city. Grace closed her eyes, listening. It's always the same sound, she said softly. The one from the night she gave me away. I didn't correct her. Some echoes don't need truth, they just need witnesses. As I turned off the light, the folder rustled faintly, though no breeze touched it. A single page had slipped free, half-folded. At the top, one sentence in Turner's handwriting. Truth hides best in places that claim to protect it. I stared at it until the words blurred. Outside, the rain began again, soft, steady, and knowing. Morning came gray and reluctant, as if even the sun doubted our plan. The motel room smelled of damp paper and restless sleep. Grace stood by the window, still in yesterday's clothes, tracing lines on the glass. Locker 312, she said quietly, like a prayer or a verdict. I nodded, folding Turner's folder into a plastic bag to keep the rain off it. We hadn't spoken of Ruth yet. The silence around her name was heavier than words. Outside, the streets were washed clean but not forgiven. At the station, everything smelled of metal and coffee and movement. Commuters drifted past us like ghosts with deadlines. Locker 312 waited near the far wall, unremarkable, beige, pretending not to matter. The brass key fit easily, too easily. When I turned it, the lock clicked with the satisfaction of something expecting to be opened. Inside was a small metal box, the kind banks used before trust went digital. A paper tag dangled from its handle, marked in red ink, B 12/79. Grace lifted it out carefully, as though it could bruise. We sat on a nearby bench, the city's noise dimming to a murmur. The box wasn't locked. Inside, files dozens, each stamped Benevolence Initiative. I flipped through, heart racing. Birth certificates, sealed adoption orders, court letters. And then, our mother's handwriting again. A note folded twice, edges frayed. If you find this, then someone finally cared enough to look twice. The words tilted slightly, as if written in a hurry. Or in fear. The file beneath was hers. Patient ID number 1247, Collins Maria. But the date of birth printed on the certificate stopped me cold. November 29th, 1979. Grace frowned. But she wrote December 5th in the letter. I double-checked the stamp. It was official, embossed, deliberate. Even the signature, Larson's, was crisp and confident. "They changed the date," I said. "To hide her." Grace whispered. "To hide me?" Turner's notes at the back of the file confirmed it. Each document cross-referenced another. Same code, same doctor, altered dates. Every baby reassigned between November 29th and December 10th shared one pattern. Files adjusted by Dr. Edwin Harper, witnessed by Judge Melville Crane. My stomach turned. "It wasn't random," I said. "It was scheduled." Grace nodded slowly. "An assembly line for mercy." The phrase felt like a curse wearing charity's clothes. At the bottom of the box, a smaller envelope. No hospital seal, no stamp, just initials, AR. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a photograph, Aunt Ruth, decades younger, standing beside Larson and Harper, shaking hands at a hospital fundraiser. Her smile was perfect, practiced, unaware, or pretending. Behind them, a banner read, "Benevolence builds families." Grace exhaled sharply. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew." I stared at the photo, searching for doubt in Ruth's face and finding none. "She wasn't just helping," I said. "She was part of it." Grace's voice cracked. "She made me believe she was protecting me." A train roared past, drowning out whatever came next. The vibration rattled the locker door beside us, metallic applause for betrayal. When the noise faded, I realized I was gripping the photo hard enough to crease it. Grace reached over, gently prying it from my hand. "She's not the only one who has to answer," she said, her eyes fierce now. I looked at her and saw our mother's defiance there, sharper, younger, alive. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "We find Harper," she said simply. "If the dates were his idea, he'll know why." I nodded. "And the judge?" Grace's lips thinned. "If the law made this legal once, it can unmake it now." I wasn't sure she believed that, but belief was optional now. Movement wasn't. We left the station and drove toward downtown, the box between us like a third passenger. Every stoplight felt rehearsed, every pedestrian watching too long. I caught glimpses of reflections in storefront glass. Two women, same bone structure, same ghosts. For the first time, I wondered if our resemblance might be dangerous. "We look like evidence," I said quietly. Grace smiled without humor. "Good." The traffic swallowed us, a slow-moving organism of engines and impatience. Above it all, a billboard for the Harper Larson Foundation gleamed like a confession. The building itself was glass and arrogance. Its lobby polished to the point of denial, its reception desk too symmetrical. A plaque near the entrance read, "Founded 1981, in service of mothers and children." Grace stared at it until her reflection trembled. "They changed one word," she said. "From for to of." The distinction was small but vicious. Ownership disguised as compassion. We stepped inside. The receptionist's smile was practiced, unblinking. "How can I help you?" she asked. Grace's answer was steady. "By remembering." We left an hour later with nothing tangible, no records, no signatures, but something heavier. A look of recognition in the receptionist's eyes that didn't belong to her job. She had known our names before we said them. As we walked to the car, I saw her lift the phone, her lips moving quickly. "They're calling someone," I said. Grace didn't turn back. "Let them," she said. "We have a date that doesn't fit, and a story that does." The storm was coming again. I could smell the ozone. Back at the motel, I spread the forged birth certificate beside the real one. The ink colors didn't match. The falsified date used a darker shade. Under UV light from my phone, faint words appeared beneath the printed line. "Original filed, December 5th, 1979. My throat tightened. "She tried to fix it," I said. "Someone caught it and changed it back." Grace stared at the glow, her face half in shadow. "Even the paper remembers," she whispered. "It just needed light." I realized then that Turner had been right. Truth hides best in protection. Outside, the storm broke, hammering the roof in relentless rhythm. Grace lay down, the photo of Ruth and the doctors clutched in her hand. "We confront her next," she said, eyes closed. before the others reach her first. I nodded, the decision landing like thunder. The sound of the train returned, closer now, its whistle long and low. The same one from the night before. Or the one from the winter our mother tried to forget. And this time it didn't sound like departure. It sounded like reckoning. By dawn, the storm had passed but left everything trembling. The motel's neon sign blinked its exhaustion, flickering between apology and threat. Grace sat at the table, sorting through the files again, her movements careful, ritualistic. Between the falsified birth records and the society's receipts, one name kept returning: Sister Agnes. She was everywhere and nowhere at once, a ghost in every margin. Her signature was on medical forms, baptism notes, even a transport voucher. But beside one entry, in different ink, she'd written just 2 words: Ask Ruth. I stared at that line until it stopped being handwriting and became prophecy. Grace leaned over my shoulder. She meant Ruth had something, she said. Or was keeping something, I replied. The ledger, she mentioned to the priest. Grace frowned. The one she hid before the society silenced her. I remembered Father O'Malley's voice. Agnes kept copies. Maybe Ruth took them, I said. To protect her. Or to protect herself. Either way, the truth had been rerouted through family. We drove toward Ruth's house after sunrise. The air smelled like rain trying to remember sunlight. Her neighborhood was quiet, all trimmed lawns and locked shutters, a place where secrets wore perfume. Grace's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles blanched. She'll deny everything, I said. At first. She's had years to practice, Grace replied. The words hung between us like fog. Ruth's house was small, perfect, curated for visitors who never stayed long. She opened the door before we knocked. Her smile froze halfway when she saw us both. I wondered when this day would come, she said. Her tone wasn't fear. It was fatigue. Grace stepped forward. You signed it, she said, holding out the folder. Ruth's eyes flicked to the photo inside, then back to Grace. So did half the town. You lied to me, Grace said. All those stories about saving children. Ruth sighed, leaning against the doorframe. You think it was that simple? Her voice trembled, not from guilt, but from memory. They told us we were placing children into safer lives. That mothers like Maria were unstable, too emotional to raise a child alone. Her gaze softened for a heartbeat. I believed them. Until I met your mother. Something in her expression cracked then, a thin fracture across the years. She knew, Ruth whispered. She knew before anyone else that it wasn't charity. It was procurement. She confronted Harper in front of the hospital board. Grace's breath caught. And they fired her. They buried her, Ruth corrected. Not literally, not then. But they took her name off every document she ever signed. Her hand trembled as she motioned for us to come in. The house smelled of lavender and regret. On the mantel, a framed photo of Ruth, and our mother smiled through the dust. She led us to a small sewing room that looked eerily familiar. The same curtains, same folded fabrics, same cold air that didn't belong. This was her idea, Ruth said. She thought sewing was redemption. I thought it was madness. Grace ran her hand over the desk. And the ledger? Ruth hesitated, then knelt by the wall, prying loose a baseboard with her fingers. Behind it, a wooden box wrapped in linen, edges worn smooth from being touched too often. She placed it on the table between us. I was waiting for the right person to take it. The box clicked open without resistance. Inside, pages handwritten in fading ink. Names, dates, initials, hospital codes. Each line was a child, a transaction, a stolen biography. At the bottom of one page, I found it. Patient number 1247, Maria Collins, infant transferred. Under comments, Agnes had written, Father objected, silenced by society. Grace's jaw tightened. So, he did fight, she whispered. And they broke him. Ruth sat heavily in a chair. They threatened him with losing his job. Said if he spoke, they'd accuse your mother of instability, have her institutionalized. Her eyes met mine. He thought silence was mercy. It never is. I closed the ledger gently, the weight of it like a stone between my palms. How many children? I asked. 74 that I could trace, she said. Agnes thought more. She looked down. I kept the ledger because she made me promise. Grace's voice softened. You loved her. Ruth nodded. She was the only one brave enough to keep looking when everyone else turned away. Her hands fidgeted with her wedding ring. They called it treason. She called it motherhood. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. You can't let this die here, Ruth said finally. Take it to the press. To the court. Anywhere but back into silence. I nodded, but Grace's expression had changed, sharper, colder. They won't let it go quietly, she said. As if on cue, the phone rang. Once, twice, then silence. Ruth didn't move. They've been calling since last night, she said. They know Turner talked to you. I felt my chest tighten. She's missing, I said. Ruth's face went still. Then they're cleaning house. Grace closed the ledger, clutching it like a weapon. Then let's burn their house down. Ruth's lips twitched into a sad smile. That's exactly what your mother said. We left with the box wrapped in a towel, like something holy. The morning sun had climbed higher, but it didn't warm. At the corner, Grace stopped the car. Do you believe her? She asked. Yes, I said. But belief isn't enough anymore. We watched Ruth's house recede in the rearview mirror, small, still, waiting. Grace whispered, She won't be safe. I nodded. Neither will we. By the time we reached the city limits, the radio crackled with breaking news. A fire in a residential area. Cause unknown. I didn't have to ask which house. Grace's hands tightened on the wheel, her eyes wet but unblinking. They're erasing witnesses, she said. I held the ledger close to my chest. Then we'll make the story too loud to erase. Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of smoke, and maybe, just maybe, justice beginning to stir. We heard about it before we saw it. The newsreader's voice on the radio was steady, almost indifferent. Authorities are investigating a residential fire on Willow Street. One confirmed fatality. No foul play suspected. But Grace and I already knew what the word suspected really meant, that someone had decided what the truth would look like before it was even found. Ruth's name wasn't mentioned, but her address didn't need translation. We drove back anyway, against every instinct that wanted to keep us breathing. Smoke still coiled from the wreckage, gray fingers tracing the morning sky. The air stank of chemicals and endings. Police tape fluttered across the street like a cheap curtain trying to hide horror. An officer stopped us before we reached the yard. Family? He asked. I nodded before I realized the lie was half true. She was my aunt. He glanced at his clipboard. I'm sorry for your loss. The tone was bureaucratic, memorized. Cause of fire's undetermined for now, he added. But sometimes old wiring gives up at the wrong hour. Grace's jaw clenched. And sometimes people help it along, she said. He looked at her, then at me, and decided he'd heard nothing. I thanked him anyway, some silences still needed pretending. We stood on the sidewalk watching what used to be Ruth's house collapse inward. The windows had melted into dark mouths. A firefighter carried out something small wrapped in a blanket, not a person, just a keepsake pretending to be one. Grace's hand found mine. She knew this was coming, she whispered. She gave us everything because she was already saying goodbye. I couldn't argue. Her goodbye had been careful, deliberate. Behind the ashes, the garden was untouched. Tulips still stood in neat rows, absurdly bright against the ruin. Among them, the stone birdbath remained, unscathed. I walked toward it, ignoring the officer's shout. Inside, something gleamed under the thin layer of ash, a metal locket, scorched but closed tight. Grace gasped softly when I picked it up. It was warm, almost pulsing. I pried it open with my nails. Inside, 2 photos, our mother on one side, Ruth on the other. Between them, folded so small it could fit nowhere else, a scrap of paper. Grace unfolded it carefully. In Ruth's handwriting, if they burn the house, the truth is already on its way. Underneath, another line, fainter, trust Agnes's second copy. I felt the world tilt. Second copy?
I said.
Grace's eyes widened. The ledger wasn't the only one.
Of course it wasn't.
Agnes had known what kind of enemies she was making. She duplicated it, Grace said, voice shaking with hope and fury. Probably hid it before the society took her down. But where?
I asked.
Her room was cleared, her records sealed. Grace looked toward the horizon. Then we start where she ended. We spent the afternoon at the ruins, sifting what the fire hadn't devoured. Firefighters came and went, indifferent to our grief. Every so often, a neighbor peeked out from behind lace curtains, their curiosity more alive than their compassion. Grace kept the locket around her neck, the ashes clinging to its chain. I won't take it off, she said. She deserves to see what comes next. By evening, reporters arrived, young faces with microphones and hollow empathy. They asked about Ruth, about the mystery fire, about possible family connections. I gave them the version of truth that survives editing. She was helping us find missing family records, I said. Now those records are gone. One reporter's eyes flickered. You mean stolen? I didn't correct her. Let the word do its work. The next morning, Ruth's name was finally printed. Not as a suspect, not even as a victim, just as a local woman. Her obituary was 6 lines long and wrong in every one. No mention of her sister. No mention of Agnes. No mention of Grace. Only beloved member of the community. Grace tore the paper in half. Beloved by whom? She asked. The question didn't need an answer. It was too big for language. We buried what was left of Ruth in the same cemetery as our mother. The gravekeeper didn't ask why the 2 women had different last names. He just handed me the receipt and pointed toward a patch of fresh earth. When the priest finished the brief blessing, Grace placed the ledger on the grave. For now, she said. Until we finish what they started. I touched her shoulder. We will. But even promises sounded fragile there. As we turned to leave, a figure waited by the gate. A man in a dark suit, hands clasped behind his back, patient. Grace Collins? He asked when we approached. His voice was polite, rehearsed, the kind lawyers use when lying slowly. Yes, she said. He handed her a card. I represent the Harper Larson Trust. We'd appreciate a conversation. Off the record. Grace's jaw tightened. We're not interested. He smiled as if she'd said yes. I think you will be. The trust has information about your mother's case, but it must be discussed privately. His eyes slid to me, too long to be innocent. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., their headquarters. Ask for Mr. Keene. He left without waiting for acknowledgement. Grace crushed the card in her fist. A trap, she said. Probably, I replied. But traps catch things, sometimes the wrong side. We stood there, the wind scattering petals from Ruth's flowers over the graves. For a moment, the 2 names on the headstones looked like one. Our mother and her sister. Burned and buried by the same men. Grace exhaled. Steady now. Then we go, she said. We don't hide. The promise sounded dangerous. But so did silence. That night, I dreamed of Ruth's sewing room again. Only this time, the curtains moved without wind, and from behind them, a woman's voice hummed that same melody, soft, circular, unfinished. When I woke, the locket was warm against my skin. The clock read 11:41, the hour my father froze time. And somewhere outside, a siren wailed like history refusing to die quietly. The next morning felt too bright for what we were walking into. Sunlight slid across the motel curtains like it didn't know better. Grace was already dressed, her hair pulled back tight, her expression carved from resolve. The locket rested over her heart, glinting like quiet armor. 10 a.m., she said. We go, we listen, we record. I nodded, tucking the ledger's copy inside my coat. Trust no one who smiles first, I added. She didn't laugh. Downtown, the Harper Larson building gleamed like a confession polished to look like virtue. Security cameras blinked in every corner, red, pretending to be eyes. The receptionist from before was gone. In her place, a man with a practiced calm and teeth that cost too much. Miss Collins, miss, he asked. Just Collins, I said. We're together. He scanned a list on his screen and smiled without warmth. Mr. Keene will see you now. The way he said see made it sound like surveillance, not hospitality. The elevator ride was soundless except for our hearts trying to stay quiet. On the top floor, the air smelled of glass cleaner and old ambition. Mr. Keene waited behind a desk large enough to hold regret comfortably. He stood when we entered, extending a hand we didn't take. Ladies, he said, I appreciate your courage in coming. Grace's voice was steady. Courage isn't the word you're looking for. He smiled thinly. Then perhaps curiosity. He gestured to the chairs opposite him. Please. We stayed standing. Keene folded his hands. Let's not pretend this is a surprise. You've uncovered files that belong to us. They belong to the people you stole from, Grace said. He sighed, the sound of a man inconvenienced by morality. Words like stolen complicate the narrative. We prefer protected. I stepped forward. Then protect this. Ruth is dead. Something flickered in his expression, gone as fast as it came. A tragedy, he said smoothly. House fires are unpredictable. Grace slammed the locket onto his desk. You did this. He looked down at it like at a souvenir from a place he'd once conquered. The trust has no reason to harm anyone, he said. We build futures. I leaned in. You build disappearances. He didn't deny it. He simply smiled like someone admiring architecture. You have something we want, he said. The ledger. Grace replied flatly. Call it insurance, Keene said. The initiative was decades ago. The past belongs to historians, not journalists. We're not journalists, I said. No, he agreed. You're the story. The words hit like a verdict. Grace's knuckles whitened. You think this ends with us? Keene turned his monitor, showing a photo, our mother, younger, holding Grace as an infant. It was the same photo we'd found, only this one had confidential stamped across it. She came to us, he said softly. Do you understand? She wasn't taken advantage of. She sought redemption. I felt heat rise in my chest. She sought survival. He tilted his head. Call it what you wish. Either way, you're here because of her choice. Grace's voice cut through the room. Then we'll finish what she started. By publishing lies, he asked. You'll ruin her memory. She doesn't need protection, Grace snapped. You do. He studied her, calculating the shape of defiance. Miss Collins, he said finally, we can make this disappear. A settlement. A scholarship in your mother's name. Financial security. Grace laughed once, sharp and exhausted. You want to buy silence again. Keene smiled. It's the only currency that never devalues. I stepped between them. We're not for sale. The silence stretched, taut as wire. Then Keene pressed a button on his desk. 2 security guards appeared at the door, polite but large. Escort them out, he said. They've said what they came to say. Grace grabbed the locket, her voice trembling but fierce. We haven't even started. He didn't answer, just watched as the guards moved closer. Outside, the city gleamed like nothing ever burned. They left us on the sidewalk with the kind of gentleness that bruises. Grace stood still, staring up at the mirrored windows reflecting the sky. That man thinks the world runs on paperwork, she said. It does, I answered, until someone sets it on fire. She looked at me, half a smile, half a plan. Then let's light it. And for the first time since we'd started, she almost looked alive. That night, back at the motel, we laid everything out. The ledger, the forgeries, Ruth's note, Turner's key. Grace mapped out connections like battle lines. The fire was a message, she said. They're scared. Good, I said. Fear makes people clumsy. She nodded. We'll need proof they can't erase. I looked at the window where rain began again. Then we find Agnes's second copy. And as thunder rolled, the locket warmed against her skin, like it already knew where to look. We left before sunrise, the sky still undecided between night and morning. The highway was empty, washed clean by the storm. Grace sat beside me, silent, her hand resting on the locket like it could still pulse. "We start where Agnes ended," I said, more to the road than to her. Her voice was steady. "The convent outside North Hollow. The one Father O'Malley mentioned. It wasn't on any map anymore, just a rumor at the end of an unpaved road. The kind of place the world forgets on purpose." By the time we reached it, mist clung to the hills like unfinished prayers. The gate was rusted, padlock broken, vines curling through the links. The old sign still read St. Mary's Refuge, letters fading into memory. We pushed through, the hinges complaining after years of silence. The chapel stood in the distance, skeletal but upright, windows hollowed out. It looked less like ruin and more like confession that refused to die. Inside, dust floated in beams of thin sunlight, the air smelling of wax and dusted faith. Grace's footsteps echoed beside mine. "She lived here," she whispered. "After she left the hospital," I said. "O'Malley said the church hid her here." I found a room near the back with a door that's still locked from the inside. The walls were lined with shelves of forgotten books, mostly hymnals and ledgers. Some had been gnawed by mice, others sealed by dust. In the center of the room, a single desk faced the window, and on it, a candle stub burned down to memory. Grace ran her hand across the wood, stopping when she felt a ridge. "Something's carved here," she said. We wiped away layers of grime until the faint outline of words emerged. "If one burns, another must breathe." Agnes had left her final sermon in wood instead of ink. Grace looked up, her eyes wide. "She did make another copy." I nodded. "The question is where?" We searched the chapel for hours. Under floorboards, behind altars, inside hollow hymn books. Every drawer creaked with secrets too small to matter. Just as I was about to give up, Grace called out from the back of the hall. "Here," she said, pointing to the confessional booth. A panel behind the priest's seat was loose, held by one stubborn nail. When she pried it off, the smell of cedar and old paper filled the air. Inside the hollow space lay a metal tin, small and deliberate. Its lid was engraved with a cross, edges smoothed by time. Grace opened it with a reverence that felt almost ancestral. Inside, rolls of microfilm, labeled in Agnes's handwriting, Ledger 2. And beneath them, a single letter, addressed to my sisters in truth. Grace unfolded it slowly, her hand shaking. The ink had bled in places, but the message survived. "If this reaches you, then the world has already tried to silence you. Do not let mercy become memory. Do not let records rot into forgiveness. Each name here is a prayer that must be spoken aloud, because the church will not do it, and the courts will not. The ones who built their altars on our silence will die in their pews of comfort. Take this where light cannot be bribed. Take it to the people." It was signed simply, A. Grace's tears fell on the page, but didn't blur the ink. "She was ready to die for this," she said. I nodded, throat tight. "And she made sure we'd live to finish it." We packed the microfilm carefully, wrapping it in cloth from the chapel altar. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift, but the silence around the convent felt heavier now, as if the building itself had been holding its breath for decades. As we walked toward the car, something glinted in the grass. A small brass tag, half buried, with a number etched into it. C-24. I turned it over. "Another locker?" Grace frowned.
"No."
"It looks like a storage key, maybe from a photo lab." Her words landed with a chill. Harper's Lab, the Benevolence Archives. Agnes hadn't just duplicated the ledger, she'd sent part of it into the enemy's hands. As insurance. As proof. The key fit perfectly into the palm that still held the locket. 2 relics from women who refused to vanish quietly. Grace looked at me, determination cutting through exhaustion. "If she hid the second copy here," she said, "then Harper still has the third." "Or he thinks he does," I replied. She smiled faintly. Then we let him believe it. It was the first time the plan sounded like hope. We drove down the hill in silence, the convent shrinking in the rearview mirror. The radio played static until a single phrase broke through. "Fire now confirmed as arson, investigation ongoing." Grace turned it off. "They'll keep burning until we show them the light." I gripped the steering wheel. Then we start with the Harper archives. The key on her chain caught the sunlight, flashing once, like an answer. The next chapter of our mother's story was still alive, and it was waiting for us to open it. By dusk, the sky looked bruised, the kind of purple that warns you it's too late to turn back. Grace drove while I read the address scratched on the brass tag for the 100th time. Harper Photo and Imaging, closed since 1984. The building sat on the edge of the industrial district, surrounded by warehouses that forgot what they stored. A flickering streetlight buzzed above the cracked asphalt. "This is it," I said quietly. "The place where mercy was developed in the dark." Grace cut the engine. "Let's finish the roll." The front door was padlocked, but decades of rust had already done half the work. Grace's crowbar, borrowed from Ruth's garage before it burned, did the rest. The door groaned open like something half asleep. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of chemicals and mildew, and the floor was littered with rolls of film like coiled memories no one wanted to touch. Our footsteps echoed, and every sound felt too loud, like the building might wake up and ask why we were there. Rows of metal cabinets lined the walls, their drawers labeled by year. Most were empty, some still full of negatives curled with age. On the far wall, a smaller room glowed faintly, a dark room with a single red light still burning, running on a power line that refused to die. Grace stared at it, her voice low. "It's like someone never stopped developing." We stepped inside, hearts in sync with the hum of the old ventilation fan. In the center of the counter sat a film canister marked C-24. I froze. "She was right," I whispered. "Agnes sent it here." Grace reached for it carefully, as if it could explode from memory alone. The seal was intact, but the label underneath bore two initials. "E.H. Edwin Harper," she said. He processed it himself. We exchanged a look neither of us had the courage to name. "Whatever's inside," I said, "it's what they burned Ruth for." Grace unspooled the film in the dim light, revealing frame after frame. Babies, mothers, nurses, signatures, paperwork laid out beside faces. A ledger captured in photographs. Proof that couldn't be shredded. Every child matched to a code from the Benevolence Initiative. Some smiling, most crying. Each one labeled reassigned. My breath caught when I reached the last strip. Our mother, holding Grace, eyes swollen, but unbroken. Grace traced the image with her fingertip. "She's looking straight at the camera," she whispered. "At him." "Harper?" I asked. She nodded. "He took this." I felt a cold fury bloom inside me, slow and certain. "She wanted him to remember her face," I said. Grace nodded, jaw tight. She made sure the crime photographed itself. The truth was chemical, permanent, and finally visible. In the drawer below the enlarger, we found envelopes stamped confidential. Each one contained copies of legal releases, donation receipts, and shipping manifests, documents proving the sale of infants through charitable fronts. Names of judges, lawyers, and doctors sprawled across the signatures. The same list Turner had risked her life to show us, now immortalized on film. Grace's voice broke. "This is enough to bury them." I shook my head. "No. It's enough to resurrect her." We gathered every roll we could carry, sealing them in plastic sleeves. As Grace turned to leave, something on the wall caught her eye, a portrait. Dust-covered, framed, but intact, a young Harper shaking hands with Sister Agnes. The inscription read, "Partnership for Hope, 1978. But someone had scratched a word into the frame below it. Lies. Grace smiled faintly. "Looks like Agnes already wrote the headline." We took the photo too. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain and rust. We reached the car just as headlights swept across the street behind us. Grace froze. We're not alone. A black sedan rolled to a stop at the end of the block. The driver didn't step out. He didn't have to. We could feel the gaze from behind the tinted glass. "Keen," I whispered. Grace nodded. They followed the ledger. We ducked into the alley, hearts pounding. The box of negatives pressed against my chest like a living thing. The sedan's door opened. A man stepped out, silhouette sharp under the lamplight. He wasn't keen. He was older, thinner, slower, but his posture was unmistakable. "Dr. Harper," Grace breathed. He looked straight at us, his voice calm and precise. "You shouldn't have come here." And for the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes, not ours. He raised a hand, not in threat, but in surrender. "I don't want this fight anymore," he said. "But they do." "Who?" Grace demanded. "Keen? The Trust." "They were never the Trust," he said quietly. "The Trust was just a mask." His voice cracked like old glass. "It was the Church." The words landed like thunder in the narrow street. He pointed toward the car. "Get in. I'll explain. If we survive the night." We hesitated for one breath too long. Behind us, the darkroom's light flickered once, then died. A single gunshot split the air, sharp and final. Harper flinched, clutching his shoulder, shouting something we couldn't hear. "Go!" he yelled. "Take it to the press." Grace pulled me toward the car. Tires screeched, headlights flared. And as we sped away, the old photo lab burst into flames behind us. The explosion painted the night in orange ghosts. Ash rained on the windshield, and the world smelled like truth finally burning. Grace's eyes stayed fixed on the rearview mirror, watching the fire devour history. "Now they'll know," she whispered. I looked at the box of negatives between us. "No," I said. "Now we'll tell them." The city skyline appeared ahead, small and waiting. And for the first time, the road didn't look endless. It looked like a beginning. By dawn, we'd reached the city. The sky was bruised again, this time from smoke instead of rain. Behind us, the horizon glowed faintly where the photo lab had stood, a pyre for half a century of secrets. Grace drove without music, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed ahead. The box of negatives sat between us, humming with the weight of the dead. Every mile closer to the newsroom felt like defying gravity. We parked 2 blocks from the North Hollow Gazette, a modest building with peeling paint and a promise of truth on its front door. The editor, Miriam Dalton, was an old friend of Ruth's, a name Ruth had mentioned once in a letter I hadn't understood until now. Grace gripped the box tighter. "You think she'll listen?" "She published A Priest once," I said. "And survived it." "That's good enough," Grace whispered. Inside, the newsroom smelled of ink, coffee, and sleeplessness. Dalton looked up from her desk, her glasses magnifying tired eyes. When she saw the locket, she froze. "You're Maria's girls," she said softly. The words landed like home. Grace nodded. "We have something that needs air before it burns, too." Dalton locked the door, closed the blinds, and gestured to the table. "Show me," she said. We laid out the microfilm, the negatives, the ledgers, and the photograph of Harper with Sister Agnes. Dalton's expression shifted from curiosity to horror in slow motion. When we reached the adoption receipts, her pen slipped from her hand. "Dear God," she murmured. This isn't just a scandal. It's a system." Grace leaned forward. "It's theft dressed as salvation." Dalton met her eyes. "Then let's undress it." The next hours blurred into interviews, recordings, documentation. Dalton called 2 other journalists, trusted, quiet, fierce. They scanned every image, cross-checked every name. Each photo became a resurrection, each record a witness. Grace read aloud Agnes's final letter, her voice shaking only once. When she finished, the room was silent except for the hum of the printer. Dalton finally said, "We go live tonight." By afternoon, the newsroom felt like a bunker made of paper and conviction. Calls poured in from lawyers, priests, even the Trust itself, each trying to delay what couldn't be delayed anymore. Dalton ignored them all. At 6 p.m., the truth gets its own time slot. Grace sat beside the window, watching the street. She still hadn't cried. "Do you think they'll believe us?" she asked. "Some will," I said. "The rest will feel something and pretend not to." She nodded slowly. "That's enough. Feeling is where truth starts." Dalton's team set up cameras in the main room. No makeup, no lights, just faces and facts. Grace refused to use her full name.
"For now," she said.
Let her story speak first. The first headline drafted on the whiteboard read, "The Benevolence Files, what the Church called mercy." When the broadcast began, the newsroom fell completely silent. Dalton's voice carried through every monitor, steady and relentless. In the late 1970s, she began. A network of hospitals, judges, and clergy operated a covert adoption ring under the guise of charity. We have obtained photographic evidence and first-hand testimony from the victims' families. The first image appeared, Sister Agnes, smiling faintly, unaware her conscience would cost her life. Then our mother, holding Grace, eyes filled with both terror and grace. Dalton's voice cracked only once, when she said our mother's name. Phones began ringing halfway through the broadcast. Other stations, reporters, even government offices. By the final segment, the story had already leapt the fence of this small newsroom. Grace watched the images play on the monitor unmoving. When the last frame appeared, the one of Ruth and our mother together, she whispered. She finally got her voice back. Dalton turned off the mic and said quietly, "So did you?" Outside, the first cameras from rival networks were already arriving. We slipped out the back before the chaos reached the door. The city felt different, louder, but somehow lighter. Headlines were already forming in the air like storm clouds. Grace clutched the locket, her knuckles white. "It's done," she said. "Almost," I replied. "Truth doesn't finish. It echoes." She smiled faintly. "Then let's make it echo for her." We walked without looking back. That night, every station carried some version of our story. The names were censored, but the images weren't. The church released a statement of shock and sorrow, and the trust issued denials wrapped in sympathy. But people recognized faces, their own, their neighbors, their mothers. Old records began resurfacing, old wounds opening. The world, for once, had to listen. In the quiet of our motel room, Grace sat cross-legged on the bed, watching the muted television replay the broadcast. For the first time, she looked peaceful. "She'd be proud of you," I said. "She'd be proud of us," she corrected. Then she took off the locket and placed it on the table between us. Her voice doesn't need a chain anymore. The clock on the nightstand blinked 11:41, just like always. Outside, the storm had stopped for good. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, slow, hesitant, unsure what it was blessing. Grace closed her eyes, whispering, "Rest now, Mom." I leaned back, feeling the weight lift like dust in sunlight. For once, the silence wasn't cruel. It was full. The courthouse smelled of old wood, rain-soaked coats, and the kind of anticipation that hurts to breathe. Months had passed since the broadcast, but the echo hadn't faded. The Harper Larson Trust was gone, its offices shuttered, its logo peeled from the doors. The church had distanced itself with the speed of guilt, and the judge whose name haunted the ledgers had finally been indicted. The world called it the benevolence trial. For us, it was just the day our mother's silence ended for good. Reporters lined the steps like a living sea of microphones and questions. Grace stood beside me, her posture quiet but unyielding. She wore black, not for mourning, but for memory. The locket was gone, left at the grave where it belonged. "Are you ready?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "No one ever is." Then we walked inside. The courtroom was colder than it needed to be. Keene sat at the defense table, hair thinner, eyes duller. Beside him, two priests and the doctor, Harper, his arms still stiff from that night. He didn't look at us, not once. The prosecutor began with the photos, the microfilm, Agnes's letters. Each projection on the wall made the room shrink smaller. Every name read aloud felt like a ghost returning to sit in the gallery. Dalton sat behind us, notebook in hand, her headline already alive in her eyes. When the prosecutor held up the ledger, the crowd shifted, as if paper could roar. Grace's hand found mine under the table. When the image of our mother appeared on screen, the judge, for the first time, looked human. And for a moment, the room forgot to breathe. Harper's testimony came on the fourth day. He spoke softly, as if still in a confessional booth. He claimed good intentions, misunderstood paperwork, and the moral climate of another time. When the prosecutor asked, "Did you profit from these adoptions?" he said, "We all did," and the room broke into murmurs. Grace whispered, "He doesn't even know he confessed." On the seventh day, the defense tried to shift the blame toward Sister Agnes, toward the misguided zeal of the era. They called her unstable, obsessive, unfit for duty. Grace stood up, uninvited. "Then call me the same," she said. The judge hesitated, then allowed her to speak. No script, no notes, just the truth she'd carried since birth. Her voice filled the chamber like light through stained glass. "My mother wasn't unstable," she said. "She was awake. She saw what mercy looks like when it's wearing a mask, and she refused to close her eyes. For that, they punished her. They took her name, her child, and called it charity. But what they forgot is that stolen children grow up, and they come back speaking the language of proof." No one clapped. No one dared. The judge's gavel finally broke the silence. "Sit down, Miss Collins," he said, voice trembling. But something had shifted. Even the walls seemed to listen differently. That night, her testimony played across every news station in the country. The clip went viral before the verdict did. Some called her brave, others called her blasphemous. But no one called her silent again. When the verdict came 2 weeks later, it was almost anticlimactic. Harper, guilty of fraud, coercion, conspiracy. Keene, accessory and obstruction. The church officials, cleared by lack of evidence, a phrase that tasted like ashes. But it didn't matter. The truth had already outrun the law. The world had seen the faces. The story couldn't be buried again. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with cameras. Grace didn't stop for any of them. She walked straight to the curb, where the first drops of rain began to fall. I caught up with her, umbrella forgotten. "What now?" I asked. She looked at the sky, the same color as the day we started. "Now," she said, "we live." We visited our mother's grave that evening, the world quieter now. Ruth's flowers had grown wild, curling around the headstone. The wind carried the faint scent of lavender, and somewhere nearby, a train passed, long and low. Grace knelt, resting her palm against the soil. "She's free," she whispered. Finally. The rain began again, soft and forgiving. I looked at her then, this woman who had been both evidence and redemption. The stormlight caught her face, and for a second, she looked exactly like Maria. Not younger, not older. Just the same strength recycled into new flesh. "We'll tell them her story," I said. Grace nodded. "And the others, too. All 74. 75, I corrected. She smiled. "Right. 75. As we walked back toward the car, the church bells rang in the distance. They didn't sound like confession anymore. They sounded like surrender. The road ahead was wet but clear, and the rain on the windshield shimmered like film being developed. Every drop a frame, every frame a memory that refused to fade. And for once, the story didn't end. It began again in light. The trial ended, but the story refused to sleep. Weeks turned into months, and still, envelopes began arriving, some handwritten, some typed, all trembling with truth. They came from everywhere, small towns, cities, even other countries. Mothers who had been told their babies died at birth. Men who discovered adoption papers hidden behind false certificates. Women who had never spoken of what happened in those sterile hospital rooms. Each letter began the same way. I thought I was the only one. Dalton's newsroom became a sanctuary of ghosts. Stacks of envelopes filled her desk until she stopped counting. She read every one, cataloged every name, and with each story, the ledger of Agnes grew longer, breathing again. Grace and I helped when we could, driving to interviews, holding trembling hands, recording voices breaking through decades of silence. Sometimes the truth sounded like sobbing. Sometimes it sounded like forgiveness. The church issued another statement, this time longer, colder, promising internal investigation and renewed commitment to transparency. But the people had stopped waiting for permission to remember. Across the country, memorials began to appear, small, unannounced, built by hands that once trembled. A candle left on a hospital step. A photo taped to a church door. Names written in chalk that rain refused to wash away. Grace started a foundation, the Ruth Project, named after the aunt who saved everything by dying for it. It offered legal aid, therapy, and access to the digitized benevolence archives. Within months, other survivors joined her, building chapters across states. Not victims, she told them, witnesses. She spoke at universities, at vigils, on radio shows that barely paid attention until the phones exploded with calls. For the first time, she smiled without guilt. For the first time, she looked free. One evening, while sorting through yet another box of letters, I found one addressed to me. No return name, just the words, "You're not done." Inside was a photograph of the convent ruins, taken recently. At its center stood a new cross, wooden, hand-carved, and nailed to it a small plaque that read, "For Agnes, who believed paper could save souls." Beneath it, one more line, freshly etched, "And for the daughters who proved her right." I sat with it for a long time, unable to move. Grace found me there, and didn't need to ask why. We returned to St. Mary's Refuge a week later. The air was softer, the grass reclaiming what the world had abandoned. Someone had cleared the chapel, leaving candles in each window. No crowd, no ceremony, just quiet gratitude humming through the stones. Grace placed a flower on the altar where we'd found the ledger. She would have loved this, she said. No cameras, no judges, just peace. I nodded. Peace that took 75 lives to earn. Outside, near the gate, a small envelope was wedged into the iron bars. It had no address, no name, just the words "to the daughters." Inside was a clipping from an old newspaper dated December 1979. It was a birth announcement, a healthy baby girl born to Maria Collins. The date was correct this time, December 5th. Grace's eyes filled, but her smile didn't break. "They fixed it," she whispered. On the record. That night, back home, I opened the box we'd sworn to seal after the trial. Inside were the remaining negatives, the ones Dalton hadn't published. Faces we didn't know, but somehow recognized. We scanned each one, adding their names to the online archive. Every upload felt like resurrection. Grace watched silently, hand over her heart. "Every click," she said, "is another candle lit." One afternoon, a letter arrived from a woman in Italy. She'd seen the documentary and recognized a baby in one of the photographs. Her own daughter, missing since 1980. She wrote, "I thought I buried her. Now I know she's alive." That letter became the first reunion. Then came another. And another. The world was learning how to breathe truth again. Months later, the government passed a resolution, official acknowledgement of the Benevolence Initiative and restitution funds for survivors. It wasn't enough. Nothing ever would be. But it was something solid in a story built from ashes. Grace spoke at the signing, her voice clear and calm. "Forgiveness," she said, "isn't the same as silence. It's what we do after we stop pretending it never happened." When the ceremony ended, she stepped away from the cameras and found me waiting by the car. "Mom would have hated all this attention," I said. "She would have stayed in the kitchen, making tea for reporters." Grace laughed softly. "Probably. But she'd still watch the news." We stood there for a long time, watching the sun sink behind the courthouse dome, the same place where justice had once stuttered and finally learned to speak. That night, I dreamed of our mother again. Not young, not dying, just her, sewing quietly, humming that same unfinished melody. But this time, the thread glowed gold instead of blue. When she looked up, her eyes were dry. She smiled, said nothing, and kept sewing. I woke with the sound still in my ears, not mourning, but continuation. Years later, I visited the archive one last time. The boxes were smaller now, most of them digitized. But the scent of paper and memory still lingered like incense. On the wall, engraved in brass, were 5 names: Maria Collins, Sister Agnes, Ruth Collins, Miriam Dalton, Grace Collins. and below them one phrase, "For the truth that refused to stay buried." I traced the letters with my fingers, whispering, "She'd be proud." Outside, the world had changed quietly. Children laughed near the courthouse fountain, and no one noticed that history had been rewritten under their feet. Grace's foundation had grown, teaching others to listen for the silences between stories. Every year, on December 5th, candles lined the church steps across the country. Some for the mothers, some for the daughters, all for the light that survived the dark. The last letter I received came on a spring morning, decades after the trial. No return address. Just the handwriting I'd know anywhere, Turner's. "Made it to Maine," it read. "The sea forgives easier than the church. Thank you for not letting them burn me twice." There was no signature, just a pressed lavender petal inside. I smiled, whispering, "You're welcome." Then I let the petal fall into the wind. At sunset, I visited our mother's grave one final time. The flowers had grown wild, weaving around the stone, their roots deep, tangled, alive, like memory itself. The air smelled of rain and rebirth. I whispered the same words she once wrote in her letter. "If you read this, then I didn't find the courage to speak. I pray you found the courage to look." And we did.